I was in a public debate at St. Arcadia Academy, arguing with Bishop Anson. He claimed that Magitech development was an insult to the gods. I told him his intelligence was lower than a rock-horned goat's. I didn't hold back. I reminded him that their God hadn't answered anyone's prayers in nearly 100 years. Basically, I told him his God had abandoned him. He fainted on the spot. That made him the 6th church official I'd made pass out this month. I walked back through the academy halls to my research lab at the top of the tower. The place was its usual mess. Magic circuit blueprints everywhere, half-finished Magitech cores, a disassembled magic gun. My assistant Lane was waiting for me with a letter from Princess Surveya. She'd rejected all 13 of my research proposals, including my project to synthesize nutritional paste from air and water. She called them ridiculous and told me to come pick up the automatic coffee machine I'd requested before, which was just gathering dust in her drawer. I was furious. I called her immediately through a communication crystal. Her face appeared on the light screen, silver-white riding clothes, moonlight-colored hair tied up, looking as sharp and impatient as always. We shouted at each other. I called her a control freak. She reminded me that without her political maneuvering, the church would have burned me at the stake years ago, and that she was the one who defended my controversial theories in Parliament. Then she cut the call on me. I flipped off the empty air where her image had been. Lane quietly mentioned that Surveya had actually approved my military Magitech equipment funding last month, a full 100,000 gold lion coins. I told him I didn't want to hear her name. He slipped out of the room. Sitting alone, I muttered that at least she had some conscience. Then Lane came back one more time with a mysterious package. No sender name, no magic tracking marks, nothing. He left it by the door and was gone for real. I found myself staring at the strange parcel. I looked at the mysterious package. No magic marks on it at all. I cast a divination spell to check it was safe, then tore it open. Inside was a black notebook. No title, no symbols, just cold animal skin cover. I figured it was some enemy's prank. The church? No, those idiots would just send soldiers. Surveya? No, she'd just yell at me directly. I flipped through. First 2 pages were blank. On the 3rd page, there was messy handwriting I didn't recognize. It said, "Hello, Professor Lagaris. This is a prophecy book. Everything written here will happen within the next 7 days. Believe it or not, but before the 7th day comes, stop the accident." I thought about it. Prophecy magic does exist in theory, but binding real high-level prophecy into a book as a magic tool would take impossible amounts of power. I know some divination myself, but I'm mostly good at predicting things about objects, not people. Still, I was curious. The next page said that at 3:20 p.m., on the 3rd floor of the Academy Library, an alchemy assistant named Alan would kick over a bottle of blast potion in his sleep and cause a small explosion. It was 2:53. I grabbed the notebook and headed to the library. I stood by a bookshelf pretending to read, watching Alan. The guy had dark circles like ink stains and was half dead from staying up all night. At 3:10 his eyes started drooping. By 3:12 he was snoring. At 3:20 exactly, his foot kicked a small glass bottle under the desk. It rolled out, shattered, red liquid everywhere, then a burst of fire. Alan woke up covered in soot and fell off his chair. The white-haired librarian ran upstairs screaming at him to copy the alchemy safety manual 200 times. I quietly turned to the next page. It said at 4 p.m. the dean would announce a ban on magic experiments in dorms because a student nearly blew up the whole building last night. I walked to the main hall. At 4 o'clock sharp, the dean stood on the platform, face like stone, with a burned painting behind him. The souvenir from last night's incident. He announced exactly what the book predicted. All dorm experiments banned. Violators severely punished. Second prediction confirmed. I was getting more and more interested. Then I turned to the last page. One line. In 1 week, Surveya Van Astria will die in an accident on the Magitech train heading to the northern border. I felt it was absurd. What kind of joke is this? I muttered. There's no way that woman dies that easily. Meanwhile, Surveya was in a council meeting at the Royal Palace in Silver Radiant City, fighting politicians as usual. The finance minister accused her of approving my 100,000 gold lion military budget again, the 6th time this year. She fired back by asking if he'd rather spend the money on a mansion for his 3rd mistress. When the military minister mocked my equipment for a cannon that exploded during testing, she shut him down too. I'd fixed that cannon in 3 days, doubled its range, and tripled its power. Her guards used my gear last month to wipe out 50 bandits with 0 casualties. Then the foreign minister brought up the Valeria Empire massing troops on the border, building new fortresses near Blackwater River, and suggested sending a diplomatic mission. I wasn't at the council meeting, but I found out later what happened. Surveya tore into every minister who challenged her. When the foreign minister suggested another round of negotiations with the Valeria Empire, she shut him down. The last treaty already cost the kingdom 3 provinces and 5 million gold lion coins. She said the empire's appetite would only grow. The commerce minister warned that war meant trade collapse and suffering, but she fired back that surrender meant losing territory inch by inch until there was nothing left. Then some old nobleman brought up my name. He compared me to the mad King Maxim, a lunatic from 1,000 years ago who experimented on living people and slaughtered 3 entire cities before an allied army killed him in the Dragon Mountains. The old man said my research challenged divine authority the same way Maxim had. Surveya cut him off. She told them my work was about letting ordinary people use Magitech, feeding farmers, and protecting soldiers. She said comparing me to that monster was the greatest insult anyone could give. After that, the Prime Minister announced the real bombshell. The Grand Duke of the Northern Border was dying, and the king wanted to send a royal family member to take over governance. Everyone looked at Surveya. The Prime Minister read out the appointment. Surveya would become acting governor of the North, with full authority over its affairs. The Grand Duke was her grandfather, so it made sense. The North was the worst posting in the kingdom. Frozen, poor, barely able to collect taxes, but Surveya accepted immediately. Her one condition: complete autonomy, hiring, tax allocation, military command, all under her control. Afterward, her friend Aurora warned her that the church had put me on a watch list. The Inquisition army was even discussing sending people to arrest me. Aurora said I was too arrogant, that the church's conservatives were already comparing me to the Mad King. Surveya said she'd warn me and that I'd listen, as long as it came from her. As for the northern appointment, Aurora saw through it. On the surface it looked like exile. But really, the king was giving Surveya a chance to prove herself, build her own power base far from political interference. If she succeeded, she'd prove she could rule the kingdom. If she failed, it meant she wasn't fit to inherit the throne. Surveya told Aurora she'd start gathering people right away. That night, I went to Surveya's villa in the capital. I needed to tell her about the prophecy book. Her maid Alina said she wouldn't see me, too tired from the council meeting. So I let myself in through the window. After all, I was the one who designed most of the magical barriers around her house. She woke up the moment I got close and stabbed at me with her sword. I blocked it with my Magitech gun. Sparks flew in the dark. When she saw it was me, she was furious. I told her it was pointless to threaten me since she couldn't beat me anyway. She reminded me our combat record back at the academy was 99 to 100. I only ever had 1 win over her. We stood there staring each other down, ready to fight. Then her maid Alina burst in. She saw us standing very close to each other in the candlelight. Surveya in her nightgown with her hair down, me right in front of her. Alina's face turned red, and she ran away stammering apologies. She completely misread the situation. Surveya's face went red too. She told me to get out. I tried to explain why I came, but she started throwing pillows at me. I tossed a small box onto her bed and told her to keep it. It might be useful later. It was a brooch I'd made, silver base with a blue crystal layered with magic circuits inside. Then I jumped out the window and disappeared across the rooftops. I heard later that Surveya first told Alina to throw the brooch away, then changed her mind and told her to put it in a drawer instead. She also ordered Alina to never speak of what happened tonight. Once I landed in an alley outside the palace, I rubbed my eyes and thought about what just happened. I'd gone there to tell her about the prophecy book, about the prediction that she would die in an accident on the train to the northern border. But the moment the words were about to leave my mouth, a powerful sense of danger hit me like a wall. It was my instinct. As a 5th-rank magus, my instinct had never been wrong. It had saved my life many times during dangerous experiments. And just now, inside her bedroom, that instinct was screaming at me, "Don't tell her." The moment I tried to tell Surveya about the prophecy, my instinct screamed that I would die if I said it out loud. So I kept my mouth shut. 7 days. I had to figure this out on my own. Walking back through the empty streets that night, I ran into someone I didn't want to see. Viscount Claude, the second prince's advisor. He tried to recruit me, saying the kingdom was unstable and the second prince admired my talent. I told him to get lost and walked away without looking back. I heard him cursing behind me. The next day, Surveya started preparing for her move to the north. She had a list of 30 personal guards, all equipped with the latest Magitech armor I'd designed. That armor had multiple rune formations built in, and I'd never published the technology anywhere. A full suit stood about 3 meters tall and looked incredible. In testing, spells below rank 4 couldn't even scratch it. Each set cost 3,000 gold coins, and that was my discounted price. She also lined up 3 advisors. A man named Grayson who knew northern finances and trade routes, one of my own students from the academy who specialized in Magitech, engineering and wanted to set up a workshop in the north, and Victor, her grandfather Fenrir's former chief of staff who'd helped defend the north against invasions years ago. Victor volunteered to serve under her. Her mentor Ileana couldn't go with her. Someone needed to stay in the capital to keep the first and second princes in check. If both Surveya and her mentor left, those 2 brothers would cause trouble. Surveya studied the map of the north carefully. Frost Keep, her grandfather's stronghold, would be her first stop. Then the border fortresses defending against invasions, and the mining districts. The north was poor on the surface but had rich mineral deposits underground. She sent a shadow guard to investigate the loyalty of northern nobles. 3 days later the report came back. Most of her grandfather's old supporters were still loyal, but some had started secretly siding with the first prince since her grandfather was dying, and the empire had doubled its border troops. Then came another piece of news. The Magitech train Surveya was supposed to take to the north had broken down, something wrong with the power core. Repairs would take at least a week. A train malfunction. The prophecy book said she would die on that train. Things were starting to line up in an uncomfortable way. I stood in my lab staring at the prophecy book. The train delay, that was my doing. I'd secretly tampered with the power core, making the diagnostic system report a fake malfunction to force a postponement. I wanted to test whether the prophecy could be changed. If the train was delayed, maybe the prediction about Surveya's death would disappear. I flipped to the last page. Nothing had changed. The prophecy was exactly the same. I needed another approach. I went to see Dean Barnabas in his tower office. The old man was sitting behind mountains of books, stuffing honey candies into his mouth with sugar dust on his white beard. I told him I wanted leave to go to the northern border, cold weather Magitech equipment research, I said. Existing gear had performance issues in extreme cold, and I needed field data. He saw right through me. Is this about Surveya? He asked with a grin. Then 3 other old professors barged in and started teasing me too. One of them reminded me I'd written a paper years ago proving that cold weather Magitech data was already complete and didn't need field verification. I had no comeback. These old men were too sharp. Barnabas approved my leave anyway, but then his tone shifted. He warned me that with Grand Duke Fenrir dying, the north was a mess. The first and second princes were both sending people in. The church was watching, and the empire was lurking across the border. Going there as a St. Arcadia professor would be seen as a signal. People would treat me as the academy's representative. Some of them would try to make sure I never came back. Walking out of his office, I thought about 6 years ago, when I was 16. I'd published a paper arguing that life wasn't a divine creation, but just complex material reactions that could be artificially synthesized. No prayers, no divine magic, no alchemy needed. The academic world exploded. The church nearly broke into the academy to arrest me. I still remember the look on their faces. Surveya saved me back then. She brought me to find Barnabas, who was traveling the world at the time, and convinced him to take me as his student. She used her connections to protect me. When I'd first shown her the paper, excited about changing the world, she just looked at me like I was an idiot and asked if I had a death wish. We'd signed a contract after that. She would fund my research, and I'd share all results with her first. What got published and when, we'd decide together. The contract was for 5 years. It actually expired a year ago, but neither of us mentioned it. She kept sending money, I kept sending reports. It had just become habit. I shook those thoughts off and went back to my lab to pack. From a big metal cabinet, I pulled out everything I'd need. My custom Magitech gun, Shatter Ignorance, with over 30 amplification runes built into the barrel, 50 defensive rune scrolls, 100 high-energy blast crystals, and various experimental tools. I stored it all in a spatial ring. Then I picked up a heavy black metal case. Inside was my latest creation, the Justice Mark V Magitech armor. My trump card. It hadn't been fully tested yet, but I knew its power was enormous. I hesitated for a moment, then packed it too. The desk was empty. I was ready. Time to go. Surveya held a farewell banquet at the Royal Iris Garden before leaving for the north. She spent the evening working the room, convincing a wealthy merchant named Mars to invest in northern mining, rallying young noble supporters like Andrew, and accepting help from Aurora, who'd smooth things over with the church elders, but warned that the Inquisition army was beyond her reach. The former deputy commander of the Northern Legion, General Iron Rock, practically begged to come along just so he could try on the third-generation Magitech armor I'd designed. He said one punch in that suit could smash a giant troll's head into its own chest. I appreciated his enthusiasm. Then the second prince's favorite lackey showed up, Viscount Philip, a powdered dandy with a jeweled fan. He brought Surveya a gift from the second prince, a cheap bearskin cloak and a tattered copy of Northern Tales. Everyone understood the insult. It was saying her assignment was exile to a wasteland. He even made a veiled jab at her bloodline, hinting she belonged in the barbaric north. Surveya handled it perfectly. She said she'd present the gift to the king so he could appreciate the second prince's thoughtful views on royal blood and frontier customs. That trapped Philip completely. If he agreed, he'd be overstepping. If he denied it, he'd be admitting he came to provoke. That's when I arrived. I grabbed Philip's skull with one hand, lifted him up, and tossed him aside like garbage. I told him he was in my way. He rolled across the floor in his fancy purple suit. A lot of people in the room looked secretly pleased. I walked straight to Surveya. She teased me about finally showing up to a social event. I told her this was the beginning of her real freedom, something she'd wanted for a long time. She froze for a second. She didn't expect me to remember that old promise we'd made about freedom. Then I asked where the food was. I was hungry. She'd already prepared my favorite dishes: honey dragon lizard tail, pan-fried chocobo steak, and blueberry pudding. All exactly what I liked, down to the last detail. She told me to eat and choke on it. I ate quickly but neatly, scanning the room as I did. I saw General Iron Rock nodding at me with approval. I spotted my student, the girl Surveya had hired as a Magitech engineer for the trip. And in the corner, Aurora was sipping juice and smiling at me like she'd predicted everything. The night before departure, Surveya's team reviewed the route and confirmed everything was safe. Bandit camps had been cleared, the train had military-grade armor plating, and her elite guards were on board. All the evidence said this trip would be fine, but Surveya still felt uneasy. She gave the order to proceed anyway. At the station, a group of thugs tried to cause trouble, shouting that Surveya would waste northern money. Her guards dropped them in seconds without even drawing swords. Grayson figured the first prince was behind it. Everyone on the train relaxed after that, thinking the worst was over. I knew better. On the train, I sat across from Surveya in the luxury car. She was reading tax reports. I kept my eyes closed, pretending to rest, but I was wide awake and scanning for threats with every sense I had. Then it hit, a massive wave of hostile intent falling from the sky like a dark cloud. I opened my eyes the same instant Surveya drew her twin swords. We looked at each other for a split second. "They're here," I said. "Enemy attack," she called out half a second before the screams started outside. Hundreds of black figures with magic jet streams on their backs dove from the clouds straight at our car. I locked onto them with my mental energy and fired off arcane missile storm. Hundreds of deep red bolts shot from my fingertips through the windows. More than half the attackers exploded in midair and fell as burning wreckage, but dozens still broke through. They melted a hole in the roof and dropped inside, black-clothed figures with strange weapons. The guards activated their Magitech armor. 3-meter-tall steel giants stood up, shaking the whole car with their steps. Close combat erupted instantly. The attackers' weapons barely scratched the armor. My guards crushed them easily. One guard squeezed an attacker's weapon to pieces. Another caved in a chest with a single punch. When an arm was torn off, there was no blood, just sparking wires and parts. They were alchemy puppets. Expensive combat puppets being used as disposable suicide bombers. Someone had deep pockets. Every downed puppet's core lit up red and started overloading to self-destruct. I stood up and activated space imprisonment. Dozens of transparent cube barriers appeared, each one trapping a puppet separately. The explosions went off inside the cubes. White light flashed, cracks spread across the barriers, but they held until the energy burned out. Still, the combined shockwave was enough to damage the train and force an emergency stop. The guards formed a defensive circle around us. The attack seemed over, but my instincts were screaming. Something far worse was coming. I looked toward the horizon, a tiny flash of light at the very edge of the world. I didn't even have time to warn Surveya. Pure combat reflex took over. I shouted, "Ether Vortex Shield," and a deep blue magic whirlpool with a spinning dark core opened in front of me. A blinding beam of energy tore across more than 10 kilometers of space and slammed into my shield. There was no explosion. The beam hit the vortex and got sucked straight into the dark center, twisted, collapsed, and vanished completely. Then my shield shattered into a million points of light. A shock wave blasted outward, whipping Surveya's hair back. The train groaned one last time and stopped dead in the open wilderness. My ether vortex shield shattered. The gems on my glove had dimmed. Blocking that beam cost me a lot. I told Surveya the attack came from somewhere beyond sight, and the attacker was at least rank 6. That's strong enough to turn a small battle on its own. Surveya ordered her guards to set up a defensive line around the wrecked train and protect the civilians. She told them not to interfere. This fight was beyond their level. I closed my eyes and spread my mental energy outward like a web, searching for the sniper. Then I felt it. Not from the distant mountains, but right behind me. A freezing killing intent exploded at point-blank range. My body moved before my mind caught up. I cast point teleport and vanished in a flash of silver. 2 dark glowing daggers sliced through the air exactly where I'd been standing. 10 meters away, I reappeared and looked back. A small girl in a fancy Gothic dress stood on top of the twisted train car, holding those daggers in reverse grip, pouting like a child who missed her catch. She smiled sweetly and introduced herself as Lilith. Someone had paid a lot of money for her to keep me here. I recognized what she was immediately. The Nullifier. I said the name that terrified every spellcaster in the underground world. A rank 6 fighter with the special ability of anti-magic, the natural enemy of anyone who uses spells. Surveya heard me and understood the danger. She grabbed her swords to come help, but the sniper fired again. A light arrow aimed straight at her forehead. She dodged it with incredible speed, her battle energy launching her across the ground like a white blur, zigzagging so the sniper couldn't lock on. She knew that stopping meant death. The battlefield was split in two. Surveya against the sniper. Me against the nullifier. I didn't hold back. I opened with Arcane Meteor, a 10-meter energy ball crackling with lightning, powerful enough to flatten a hilltop. Lilith's smile froze for a second. "Going all out right away?" she said. The meteor crashed down. She didn't dodge. She just raised one small hand in a black lace glove. The moment it touched her palm, the entire meteor simply vanished. No explosion, no shockwave, no trace of magic left. Gone, as if it never existed. "Is that all you've got, Professor?" she said, smiling innocently again. I teleported 50 meters away into midair. But she was faster. A black shadow appeared beside me the instant I materialized, daggers aimed at my throat. I barely raised my gun to block. The impact sent a shockwave through my arms and threw me backward. She was rank 6 in physical strength too. Completely unfair. She landed lightly and twirled her dagger. "Look, Professor, my employer only paid me to stall you. My partner is handling your princess right now. We don't need to kill each other, right?" At that same moment, the sniper on the mountain fired again, but not at Surveya directly. The arrow exploded above her head in a burst of pure white light. It blinded her instantly. A high-pitched noise wiped out her hearing, leaving nothing but ringing. The flash arrow blinded and deafened Surveya completely. While she couldn't see or hear, the sniper fired 5 homing arrows from different angles, cutting off every escape route. She fought on pure instinct, spinning her twin swords Moonfall and Star Drop into a silver blur. She deflected 3 arrows, but 2 got through, one in her left shoulder, one in her right leg. Her armor absorbed most of the damage, but she still groaned from the impact. I wasn't doing much better. Lilith's anti-magic field killed every spell that got close to her. I stopped trying magic and switched to my gun, firing alchemical bullets with explosive crystal cores, pure physical attacks her anti-magic couldn't cancel. For the first time, she looked surprised and had to dodge. One bullet blew a hole in the train car behind her, but she was too fast. She closed the distance before I could react, and I barely blocked her daggers with a small hexagonal shield from my glove. She shattered it instantly. I kept teleporting and shooting, but I was losing badly. A spellcaster with 90% of his power neutralized by anti-magic can't trade blows with a rank 6 fighter. Then everything went wrong at once. The sniper fired a massive star-piercing arrow at Surveya, not aimed at a weak point, but meant to vaporize her entirely. She crossed her swords and activated Royal Veil, but the barrier lasted less than half a second before shattering. The blast sent her flying over 10 meters. At the same moment, Lilith kicked through my shield and slammed her foot into my chest. I felt like my ribs were cracking. I flew backward. We crashed into each other. Surveya and I collided back to back and stumbled, barely staying on our feet by leaning against one another. We were both gasping for air. Between breaths, she mocked me. The great Professor Lagaris, getting beaten up by a little girl. I pushed my nearly broken glasses back into place. Says the future lioness of Astria, getting used for target practice by some hillside archer. Is your royal swordsmanship only good for cutting cake at banquets? She told me to shut up. I told her we should switch opponents. She'd take the anti-magic girl, a close combat fighter against a close combat enemy. I'd take the sniper. I'd been tracking his position with my mental energy the entire time while fighting Lilith. We agreed instantly. I activated long-range point teleport and vanished. I appeared right behind the sniper on his mountaintop. He was still aiming at Surveya, preparing a killing shot. He felt me behind him and spun around. My face was already inches from his. Too late for him to run. Down on the plain, Lilith froze when I disappeared. She tried to sense my magic, but found nothing in her anti-magic zone. While she was confused, Surveya exploded into motion. Silver light burst from her feet. Quicksilver step. She poured every bit of frustration from being pinned down into her twin swords and charged at Lilith like a bolt of silver lightning. On the mountaintop, the sniper fox spun around the moment I appeared. He didn't hesitate. He pulled a poison knife and stabbed at my heart. But I was faster. Silver lines lit up across my body under my black robe, and my 5th-generation Magitech armor, Justice, materialized around me. His knife hit my chest plate dead on. The golden runes flared, a micro-repulsion field activated, and the blow was completely absorbed. Not even a scratch. He had no idea what he was looking at. I raised my armored hand and fired a dissolution bolt. He rolled out of the way just in time. The bolt hit a boulder the size of a carriage behind him, and the rock silently vanished, broken down into base particles. That got his attention. He fired 3 tracking arrows in a triangle formation to cut off all my escape routes. I didn't move. The arrows passed straight through me. My phase deflection shield bent space around my body, so physical projectiles couldn't touch me. His eyes nearly popped out. Then I darkened the sky and dropped 3 arcane meteors, each over 50 meters wide, from 3 directions at once. He ran like a ghost across the mountain, leaping between rocks and cliffs, barely dodging the explosions. Down on the plain, Surveya was giving Lilith a very bad time. Without magic to cancel, Lilith's anti-magic field was nearly useless against a pure physical fighter. When their weapons clashed for the first time, the sheer force from Surveya's sword sent Lilith flying backward, tearing open the skin on both her hands. Surveya's royal moon bloodline made her body absurdly strong. She abandoned all fancy magic sword techniques and fought with nothing but raw knight swordsmanship, speed, and brutality. Lilith was completely overwhelmed. She'd been paid to stall a mage, not fight a human dragon. Back on the mountain, I stopped the meteor bombardment. I'd seen enough. It's over, I said quietly. 3 deep red energy spheres materialized directly beside Falk using my original technique, remote coordinate casting, which lets me form spells at any point in space I've already mapped. They detonated instantly. He barely survived, stumbling out of the explosion burned and broken. He screamed and poured everything he had left into one final shot, star-piercing arrow, a full rank 6 attack. The energy made the entire mountain shake. He wanted to destroy me and the whole peak together. I simply teleported away. His arrow missed and flattened a different mountain in the distance. He turned to run. I appeared in front of him again. The moment you set foot on this mountain, the outcome was already decided. I clenched my fist. Dozens of spell nodes I'd secretly planted across the mountaintop during our fight activated all at once. Energy beams shot up from every direction and wove together into a massive spherical barrier, sealing the entire summit. Fox slammed into the invisible wall at full speed and bounced back. He pressed his hands against it, looking around in horror. He finally understood. It had been a trap from the start. I looked at him through the barrier without any emotion. I originally developed this containment spell to safely test an explosive that could produce temperatures like the sun. Now I'm just using it in reverse. A tiny point of light appeared inside the barrier near him. It began expanding rapidly, releasing blinding light and heat. Down by the wrecked train, Surveya, Lilith, the guards, everyone stopped and looked up at the mountain. A miniature sun was rising inside the barrier, radiating light that could destroy everything it touched. Ether dissolution, corona. The mountaintop was gone. Where it used to be, there was only a smooth, mirror-flat melted surface with red lava dripping down the edges and dark smoke rising into the sky. Everyone near the train, soldiers, nobles, merchants, stared at it with blank faces. I landed back on the ground, a little unsteady. That spell had cost me a lot. My face was pale, but I confirmed the sniper was completely vaporized. With the sniper gone, Surveya had nothing holding her back. Lilith was still frozen from the shock of watching me create a miniature sun. 1 second of hesitation, that's all it takes at their level. Surveya poured everything she had left into her swords and charged. Silver severance. A wave of silver light slammed into Lilith and sent her tumbling across the ground. By the time she stopped rolling, she was coughing blood. Lilith reached into her clothes for a hidden trump card, a rare elven space scroll that could teleport her 100 miles away through any barrier. But it wasn't there. I'd already taken it during our fight. I held it up between 2 fingers and critiqued the outdated trigger mechanism like it was a museum piece. She stared at me in disbelief. Nobody had told her the research-obsessed professor was also a world-class pickpocket. With Surveya's swords at her neck and my gun aimed at her forehead, Lilith surrendered instantly. Her terrified face switched to a sweet, innocent smile in a heartbeat. She raised her bloody hands, saluted, and begged for her life, offering to tell us everything about who hired her. I tossed her a small crystal bottle filled with thick green liquid. I told her to drink it or Surveya would cut off her limbs. Surveya helpfully flexed her wrists and tested the weight of her swords, as if deciding which limb to start with. Lilith drank it immediately. Within seconds, her strength drained away completely. The drug suppressed cellular activity and nerve responses in high-rank fighters. I tied her up with rune-covered rope. Surveya asked when I developed that drug. I told her it was new, designed to suppress knights and supernatural beings. She asked what knight enemy I had that needed such a thing. I didn't answer. I teleported back to the destroyed mountaintop and returned with the sniper's bow. The enchanting and materials were imperial military work, not our kingdom's style. Worth studying. The surviving nobles and merchants finally gathered their courage and came over. The way they looked at us had completely changed, like mortals staring at gods. The merchant Mars, who'd been cautiously considering investing in the north, threw himself into a bow and pledged to double his investment. Then triple it. Then everything he owned. The others rushed forward too, fighting to declare their loyalty. One vaporized mountaintop accomplished more than any speech could. I inspected the train. The power core was overloaded, 70% of the connection matrix was burned, and 3 drive shafts were broken. But the main structure was intact. I had spare parts and high-strength alloy in my spatial ring. 6 hours and I could get it running again, slower, but enough to reach Winter City. Surveya's guard captain wanted to report the attack to the capital immediately. Surveya shut that down. No reports until we reached Winter City and had solid footing. We'd handle this ourselves. I got to work repairing the train, parts and tools floating around me, assembling and disassembling themselves with precision. In the corner, Lilith sat tied up like a wrapped package, her big eyes rolling around, clearly scheming something. After a while, I stopped working. Every floating part clicked back into place. Now, I said, looking straight at our prisoner. You can talk. Who sent you? Lilith spilled everything she knew. The person who hired her was a figure in a black robe, completely covered, with a disguised voice. Impossible to identify. But she still had the specially made gold bars used as payment. She said a strong enough divination mage could trace the employer through them. She looked at us hopefully, like she deserved praise. Surveya and I exchanged a look. The lead was probably useless. Anyone smart enough to hire rank 6 assassins would have prepared for tracking. And my divination only works on objects, not people. When she saw our expressions darken, Lilith's survival instincts kicked into high gear. She begged us to spare her, saying she was a rank 6 fighter, third on the mercenary rankings, and more valuable alive. Surveya looked her up and down like a flawed product and pointed out that an anti-magic specialist who couldn't cast spells and couldn't beat her in close combat wasn't worth much. That hit Lilith right where it hurt, but I saw value in her. Her anti-magic constitution was genuinely unique, and I wanted to study how it worked. I told her I needed an experimental subject. I pulled out an enchanted parchment contract with an ornate border of golden patterns. I wrote out the terms on the spot. 10 years of service to Surveya and me, obedience to most commands, full cooperation with my research, and almost no pay. Lilith looked miserable, but figured 10 years for her life was acceptable. She was an elf with near-eternal lifespan. She tried to negotiate. I asked if she preferred the permanent alternative. Surveya's sword started humming. Lilith signed immediately, pressing her blood onto the activation point in the golden border. The moment her blood touched it, the decorative gold patterns revealed their true nature. Thousands of ancient runes formed a binding circle far more complex than the main text. Golden light shot into her forehead. A soul-binding contract locked into place. She screamed. The written contract said 10 years, but I'd written the real terms in ancient script hidden in those golden patterns. The actual duration was permanent. I told her to hand over her storage ring, her entire life savings from decades of mercenary work. She begged me to leave her at least travel money. I stared at her until she got nervous, then asked if she was saying she'd wanted to kill me during our fight. She panicked and shoved the ring into my hands, calling it a gift. I wiped her imprint off it immediately. She looked like she was about to cry. Surveya shook her head at Lilith and said being that attached to money as a mercenary was beyond saving. A few hours later, I finished repairing the train. Burned connection matrix replaced, overloaded power core stabilized. The nobles and merchants couldn't believe it. Damage that would take the kingdom's best technicians weeks to fix, I'd handled alone in hours. The fat merchant Mars looked at me like I was a walking god. He was probably calculating how much more money to throw at Surveya's northern project. The train started moving again. The atmosphere on board had completely changed. Everyone looked at Surveya and me with a mix of awe and fanatical loyalty. Lilith sat untied in the corner, hugging her knees, shooting me resentful looks every few minutes, bound by a permanent soul contract with zero savings. Surveya changed into clean clothes and sat by the window. She watched the scenery fly past, then looked at me resting with my eyes closed. After a moment of silence, she opened her mouth to speak. Surveya thanked me quietly. She said if I hadn't been there, she might have actually died. I kept my eyes closed and told her she owed me danger pay, lost wages, emotional damages. I said she should at least make me a duke when we got to the north. The softness in her eyes vanished instantly. She told me I was pushing my luck and asked if I wanted the throne too. I said managing a country sounded too boring. On the train, I gave Lilith her first assignment, write a detailed report on her anti-magic constitution. When she awakened it, what it felt like, any drawbacks, everything. She whined that she couldn't write. I told her she had 3 days or I'd dock her food budget. She pointed at the hard bread and water on the table and complained that a rank 6 fighter deserved better. I told her she could have meat after the report was done. Surveya turned away to hide her laughter. While pretending to read, I checked the prophecy book with my mental energy. New content had appeared. It seemed to refresh roughly every 10 days. The new prediction said that 3 days after the princess arrived in Winter City, 7 northern nobles would panic and flee with their families. 7 names were listed clearly. I memorized all of them. I asked Surveya for a list of northern nobles. She was suspicious but handed it over. I cross-referenced it with the prophecy, then wrote down 10 names and told her these people were problems. She asked how I knew. I said divination, that I'd been researching it lately, and had some breakthroughs. She didn't fully believe me, but agreed to send her shadow guards to investigate. 3 hours later, the train pulled into Winter City Station. A squad of soldiers in black uniforms was waiting. Their leader was Victor, the former chief of staff, a man in his 50s with a straight back, weathered face, and an old scar running from his eyebrow to his cheek. He knelt when Surveya stepped off the train, relieved to see her safe. He told her the Grand Duke was still waiting for her. Victor glanced at me politely, assumed I was an advisor, and welcomed me to the north. I didn't correct him. I was busy scanning the surroundings with my mental energy. Winter City was the northern capital, but compared to Silver Radiant City, it was pathetic. Crumbling walls, narrow streets, barely any magic lamps. Most places still used torches. What a thriving metropolis. On the platform, the welcoming nobles showed every possible reaction. A few old ones looked genuinely happy, Fenrir's loyal supporters. Most had complicated expressions, sizing Surveya up, and a handful looked pale and nervous, eyes darting around. I checked the crests on their clothes against the prophecy. All 7 nobles who were going to run were standing right there. I smiled to myself. This time, I'd see where they thought they could escape to. In the carriage, Surveya asked for my opinion on the North's poverty. I reminded her I wasn't her advisor. I was here for my own research. She teased me, saying she thought I came because I was worried she'd mess things up and cut off my funding. I told her that since she was a decent enough investor, I'd give her 2 pieces of advice. Focus on basic education and crop yields first. My Magitech equipment production line was already streamlined. She just needed minor reforms to plug it in. She paused, then smiled. Got it, my great mage. The carriage stopped at the Duke's mansion. It was a large estate, but clearly past its prime. Faded walls, worn carvings. Surveya stepped out, took a deep breath, and told me to come meet her grandfather. Lilith trailed behind us carrying luggage, watching how Surveya and I interacted. I could practically see her mentally crossing out hostile enemies and replacing it with complicated, needs further observation. Surveya dismissed everyone else, but told me to follow her to see her grandfather. Victor, the chief of staff, looked uneasy but obeyed. She pushed open the heavy oak door. The room smelled like strong herbs, old leather, and metal oil. On the bed lay a very thin old man with neatly combed white hair and a fierce scar running from his eyebrow to his cheek. Even dying, he looked like a wolf. Fenrir von Winterhold, the wolf of the north. His cloudy eyes found Surveya first, and a flicker of life returned to them. She knelt by his bed and held his cold, bony hand. Then his gaze moved to me. He studied me for a while and said the intelligence from the capital mentioned a young academy professor at Surveya's side, but nobody mentioned that professor could erase a mountain with one spell. I pushed my glasses up and said nothing. Surveya told him about the train attack. He barely reacted to the news of 2 rank 6 assassins. When she finished, he just snorted, flies that can't stand the light. Hard to tell if he meant the assassins or certain people in the capital. He pulled a short sword from under his pillow and gave it to Surveya. Wolfhead handle, northern map carved on the sheath. The winter wolf's fong, the symbol of command over the Northern Legion. He told her that from today, the North answered only to her. Then he told her not to worry about traditions or old men's pride. The North was rotten to the core and needed ruthless action. Cut down anyone who stood in her way. He was still alive to silence the critics, but his time was short. She had to make the North truly hers as fast as possible. Then he told Surveya to leave. He wanted to talk to me alone. After the door closed, the old man's tone softened. He told me that for years, Surveya had mentioned me in her letters. At first she complained about an annoying rival who competed with her at everything. Then she swore she'd smash all my lab equipment. Later, she started admitting that some of my ideas, though crazy, might actually be useful. He said without me, she probably wouldn't have survived this trip. He told me her situation was dangerous. Her mother died young. Her father originally saw her as nothing more than a bargaining chip, and her 2 half-brothers in the succession fight would never let her be. Once he died, too many people would be watching her. She couldn't do it alone. He asked me to help her. He said he knew it was a lot to ask, but she trusted me more than anyone in the royal family. I was quiet for a moment. Then I told him I'd do it. Not because of his request, but because Surveya was my investor, and protecting your investor was basic business sense. He smiled at that. Then he offered me something in return, a secret that every spellcaster on the continent would kill for. The legacy of the Mad King Maxim. My composure cracked. Maxim was the most powerful and most infamous mage in history. He tried to challenge the gods and was killed by the first King Astria and the Seven Knights. All his research vanished with his tower. For any scholar chasing magical truth, his notes were the ultimate prize. Finrod told me his ancestor was one of those Seven Knights. He knew where Maxim actually died. If I helped Surveya make the North truly hers while he was still alive, he'd tell me the location. When I walked out, I was still a bit dazed. Surveya was leaning against the wall waiting. She frowned at my expression and asked what he said. I pulled myself together and told her the Grand Duke had given me a warm and friendly greeting and expressed strong support for my scientific career. Talk like a normal person, she snapped. He said you used to wet the bed as a kid, Lagaris. That night, Surveya moved fast. She sent the capital a detailed report about the train attack, then announced her inauguration ceremony would be held in 3 days at the Duke's mansion, with all northern nobles invited. Shadow Guards slipped out into the city to investigate the 10 families on my list. Surveya's orders were simple: find any connection to the train attack, and if nothing turned up, dig into tax fraud, land disputes, old crimes. She was certain none of them were clean. The next morning, we got the full picture of the North's military situation in the command room. Victor reported that the main army, 20,000 soldiers, was pinned down on the northeastern front, staring down 15,000 orc warriors from the subhuman empire. They'd been deadlocked for half a year, barely holding with defensive fortifications since orcs were stronger in individual combat. The annual military budget was 50 million, no, 50,000 gold lion coins. For comparison, the second prince's personal guard back in the capital got 3 million a year. The North couldn't even cover basic maintenance. Most soldiers still carried standard swords and leather armor. Magitech equipment across the entire legion, fewer than 100 sets. Finrod had been covering the shortfall with his own personal wealth, but now that he was dying, that money would dry up fast. Surveya asked me about costs. I told her a Thundermark on Magitech rifle cost 2 gold coins per unit in materials if mass-produced, but building the production line would cost 200,000. Magitech armor, even the older second-generation model, was 30 gold coins per set, with a factory costing 1 million. Full re-equipment for 20,000 soldiers in just guns and armor would run over 600,000, before maintenance and other gear. Every problem came down to money. The North was too poor, bad soil, low output, barely any trade or tax revenue. Surveya and I looked at each other at the same moment and understood the same thing without a word. The North had no money, but certain northern nobles definitely did. I went down to the basement of the Duke's mansion, which I'd turned into a temporary lab. Lilith was curled up in the corner. She jumped to her feet when I walked in and called me, Master. I told her to stop. It sounded disgusting. I ran some tests on her. Her constitution converted surrounding magical energy back into pure ether. I told her this might mean her body could cure certain incurable diseases. She shivered, unsure if that was good or bad news. I told her not to worry, I wouldn't take her apart. She was still useful. Then I took out one of the gold bars from Lilith's confiscated storage ring, the payment for the assassination job. I placed it in a magic circle and contacted my old Professor Seals through a recording crystal. He was a specialist in divination tracking, unlike me. I asked him to trace the gold bar to its source. He said it was high purity with anti-tracking treatment, expensive work. He could do it, but I'd owe him a favor. I agreed. He said 1 week. That night, Surveya sat in the command room going through the investigation files the Shadow Guards had brought back. Every family on the list had a record of crimes, tax evasion, seizing public property, smuggling contraband. And just as the prophecy book predicted, 7 of those families were secretly selling off assets and planning to flee with their money right after the inauguration ceremony. Surveya closed the last file and ordered every Shadow Guard on standby. On the day of the ceremony, not a single one of them would escape. Her grandfather was right. The North was rotten to the core, so she'd rip it all out by the roots. 3 days later, the inauguration ceremony took place in Winter City's main square. I stood in the shadows behind the crowd with Lilith. The square was packed, nobles in fine clothes up front with fake smiles and calculating eyes, common folk and soldiers craning their necks from the outer ring. Surveya walked up the platform wearing Fenrir's old military uniform and a black sable cloak, the winter wolf's fong at her waist. She kept it short and blunt. She said the North was poor, chaotic, and weak. That was a fact. But it wouldn't stay that way. She'd prove it through action. The applause afterward was thin and half-hearted. Lilith whispered that the speech didn't seem to work. I told her Surveya was never looking for applause. That evening, the real event began. In the Duke's meeting hall, every important northern noble sat around a long table. Surveya started with routine questions: grain collection, mine output, border defense. Her tone was warm, her questions basic. The nervous nobles relaxed. They thought she was young and easy to fool. One old count even yawned, mentally planning his overnight escape. Then Surveya put down her teacup and the warmth drained from her eyes. Now, let's talk about betrayal. The room froze. The heavy doors slammed open. Akash and the guards stormed in wearing full Magitech armor, went straight for the 7 families from the prophecy list, and dragged them from their seats to the center of the hall. The Shadow Guard captain dropped a massive stack of case files on the table. Tax evasion, theft of public property, smuggling. Then came the letters they'd written to contacts outside the North, preparing their escape. Their own handwriting, clear as day. All 7 went white. One count who had marriage ties to one of the families stood up and tried to plead for mercy. I was sitting in the corner. I raised my gun and fired. The alchemical bullet grazed his ear and punched through the chair behind him. Wood splinters exploded. He froze, face drained of color. "Who do you think you are?" I said, letting my magical pressure flood the room. "You think you're qualified to beg on their behalf?" He collapsed back into his seat, too scared to breathe. Surveya threw a separate report at the 7 kneeling nobles' feet. They screamed that they were innocent, banging their heads on the floor. She ignored them and turned to the rest of the room. "The evidence is clear. No arguments." She declared all 7 families guilty of treason. Ringleaders executed immediately. All assets seized. Their screams echoed through the hall. Every remaining noble sat pale and shaking. Some of the older ones couldn't stop their hands from trembling. Surveya scanned the room. "Anyone else want to speak up for them?" Silence. "Good." She sat back down and sipped her tea. Meeting adjourned. After Surveya said, "Meeting adjourned," not a single noble dared move. They sat frozen like statues. She didn't look at them again. She ordered Akash to take his squad and raid all 7 families immediately. Seize everything. Kill anyone who resists. And she told him to start with the strongest one, the Marcus family. Everyone expected her to go after the weakest first. She went straight for the hardest target. The purge began that night. At the Marcus estate, the head butler Hector rallied over 300 well-armed private soldiers. He was a peak rank 4 knight himself, one step from rank 5, and he'd served the family for 40 years. He told his men the princess was a tyrant slaughtering nobles, and if they held out, other noble houses would come to their rescue. Then Akash's squad arrived. 10 3-meter-tall figures in dark Magitech armor walked out of the darkness in perfect formation. Every step sounded like a hammer hitting stone. Heavy, mechanical, inhuman. Their armor was covered in blue rune patterns with no visible gaps. Instead of faces, they had smooth, dark red crystal visors glowing in the night. The private soldiers' courage crumbled the moment they saw them. But Hector screamed at his men to charge, calling the armor tin cans. He covered himself in golden battle energy and launched himself at Akash like a cannonball, confident his sword could cut through anything at close range. His soldiers followed in a wave behind him. The 10 armored figures simply raised their weapons, the Magi burst guns I designed specifically for 4th-generation armor. Akash gave one word: fire. No thundering explosions. Just a dense, skin-crawling hiss as thin red beams poured from 10 guns and wove a net of death. The charging soldiers didn't even have time to scream. Shields and leather armor meant nothing. The alchemical rounds punched straight through. Bodies were flung into the air and burst into red mist. The entire charge collapsed in seconds. Hector threw everything he had into a golden shield, his strongest defense after 40 years of training as a knight. 3 beams hit it. The first dimmed the shield by half. The second cracked it. The third shattered it completely. Before he could process what happened, 7 more beams tore through every part of his body. He and his armor were ripped to pieces. From charge to death, less than 10 seconds. From start to finish, under 3 minutes. Over 300 soldiers gone. When Victor arrived with the city garrison, he found a hellscape. Body parts everywhere, blood soaking the stone streets. 10 black metal giants standing motionless in a sea of corpses without a single drop of blood on them. Their red visors swept across Victor and his soldiers, and every man felt ice run from their feet to the top of their skulls. Victor had fought orcs on the border for 20 years. He couldn't speak. He recognized fragments of Hector's armor on the ground. A peak rank 4 knight, wiped out without ever getting close enough to swing his sword. A terrible thought formed in his mind. The way wars were fought, not just in the north, but across the entire continent, was about to change forever. News of what happened at the Marcus estate spread through Winter City overnight like a silent plague. 300 soldiers and a peak rank 4 knight, gone without a sound. The remaining 6 families didn't even try to resist. Their servants and relatives dropped to their knees and opened every vault and secret room the moment Akash showed up. By early morning, the surviving nobles were lined up outside the Duke's mansion in the freezing wind, carriages loaded with treasure chests, wearing their finest clothes and most humble faces. Every single one of them was terrified. The men who'd sat in that meeting hall with cold, calculating eyes just yesterday were now sweating and trembling, hoping their gifts would buy them a chance to live. Surveya made them wait. The gates stayed shut for hours. Finally, the old butler came out and told them the princess was busy and wouldn't see anyone. But she'd accept their gifts. They could leave. Leave your treasure, get out. It was more humiliating than being yelled at. But not one of them complained. They actually sighed with relief. Accepting the gifts meant there was still room to negotiate. They scrambled to unload their boxes and scurried away. Surveya watched them from the window without any expression. Victor came in with a report. The soldiers were thrilled by what she'd done. They said this was how the Winterhold family should lead, with iron and blood. In the north, strength spoke louder than speeches. Then Victor asked the question every soldier in the Northern Legion wanted answered. Could they get Magitech armor too? Surveya looked at me. I didn't look up from my book. I told him a single set of 4th-generation armor cost 3,000 gold coins, not counting weapons or maintenance. Full army deployment was impossible. 2nd generation was the realistic limit. Victor did the math in his head, 60 million for full 4th-gen equipment, and his excitement died on the spot. Then Grayson walked in. He was Surveya's financial expert, son of the former Northern tax official who'd been murdered for trying to investigate noble tax fraud. Surveya had saved him and added him to her team. He knew every coin that flowed through the north. He handed Surveya the asset report from the 7 seized families: property, land deeds, mines, shops, cash, jewels, art. She flipped through it quickly, then stopped. She looked up at Grayson and asked if the numbers were verified. 3 times, he said, and the real value was probably higher. I finally looked up from my book. How much? She handed me the list. I glanced at it and raised an eyebrow. 10 million gold lion coins. Victor nearly collapsed when he heard the number. 10 million gold lion coins. Enough to fund the Northern Legion for 20 years. Those 7 families had been draining the north dry, hoarding more wealth than the entire region could produce. He was shaking with rage. Grayson calmed him down and pointed out the real problem. The money was a windfall, but without a proper financial system, it would be gone in 2 years with nothing to show for it. The surviving nobles had just delivered over 5 million in loyalty gifts, yet their total tax payments last year were under 200,000. Kills 7 corrupt families, and dozens more would keep cheating the system. Grayson proposed replacing all tax officials with our own people and creating an inspection squad under Surveya's direct control. Simple, swap the personnel, tighten oversight. Victor agreed immediately. I didn't look up from my book. You're just replacing old parasites with new ones, I said. In a few years they'll rot the same way, because the soil that breeds corruption hasn't changed. The room went quiet. I closed my book. I told them the real question wasn't who collects taxes, but who pays them and how. Why squeeze starving peasants who barely produce anything? Take half their harvest, and they die. The answer was to slash or eliminate basic agricultural taxes entirely. Instead, tax the people who actually have money. Commercial taxes with tiered rates based on business size and profit. A corner shop and a cross-city trade route shouldn't pay the same. Landholding taxes that increase exponentially the more land someone owns. forcing big landowners to give up idle property. Luxury taxes on everything non-essential, southern spices, silk, expensive jewelry. The principle was simple. The higher someone's income, the more they contribute. Don't squeeze the last copper from the poor. Cut the biggest slice from the rich. The room was dead silent. Surveya stared at me with genuine shock. She'd always known me as a magic researcher, never expected I understood economics and governance this deeply. Grayson's eyes lit up like he'd seen a revelation. He started building on the idea immediately. Special resource taxes on mining and fur trade, industry-specific rates. He understood. Surveya cut him off and appointed him temporary finance director of the North on the spot. She gave him 3 days to draft a complete tax reform plan based on my framework, with full authority over personnel and the seized funds. Grayson knelt and swore his loyalty with a trembling voice. Lilith watched everything from her corner, completely confused. In the underworld she came from, when you took someone's money, you bought better weapons and hired more people to steal more money. The idea of using seized wealth for agriculture and tax reform made no sense to her. She decided Surveya and I had very different brains from normal people. Meanwhile, in a quiet house across the city, the North's senior judicial officials were meeting in secret. Chief Justice Herman was furious. Surveya had bypassed the courts entirely, judged and executed nobles on her own authority, and seized their property. He called it a violation of kingdom law. The others were afraid of her shadow guards and those steel monsters, but the eldest among them had a plan. They couldn't fight her directly, but the North belonged to the kingdom, not to her family. They would send a message to the capital, to the king and the Privy Council, reporting everything that happened. Their accusation: the princess was plotting rebellion. Grayson worked through the night and came back with a full tax reform draft. He split taxes into 3 types based on my framework. First, agricultural taxes, so farmers keep 95% of their harvest. Second, commercial taxes with 15 tiers. Small street vendors pay almost nothing. Massive trade guilds making over $100,000 a year pay 50%. Third, landholding taxes that climb exponentially. The more land you own, the higher the rate, maxing at 60%. The plan put a blade to the throat of every wealthy family in the North. Within 3 days, the new tax policy was posted in every city. When the common people heard about the agricultural tax cuts, they broke down crying in the streets, cheering for the princess. The nobles and merchants went white, but nobody dared resist. The Marcus family's blood was still fresh. Then Surveya turned to the military. The Northern Legion had been owed 3 years of back pay, over 300,000 gold coins in wages and death benefits for fallen soldiers' families. She ordered it all paid immediately, plus an extra 300,000 as a bonus for every frontline soldier. Victor's eyes went red. He knew exactly what 60,000 gold coins meant. The entire army's loyalty, permanently locked to one person. I sat in the corner reading a book I'd taken from the Marcus collection, pretending not to care about the millions being tossed around. Surveya noticed and teased me about only coming to the North to raid noble libraries. I told her what the North really needed was industry. I walked to the map and circled a barren area east of Winter City. I said I'd build an industrial zone there, mine the ore, smelt it into steel on site, then forge it into weapons, tools, and machines. I named the plan Heart of Winter. Grayson asked how much it would cost. I looked at Surveya and said half. Half of everything seized. 600 million. No, 600,000. Grayson nearly fainted. Surveya laughed coldly and called my appetite bigger than a dragon's. But she agreed. She gave me the 2 mining deeds, an iron mine and a coal mine, as my technical stake, plus 500,000 in cash and full authority over the project. That night, I moved to a manor near the mining district with Lilith and started drawing up the industrial blueprint. After I left, Surveya created something else, a million-coin fund called the Northern Talent Recruitment Fund. She planned to lure frustrated scholars, skilled craftsmen, and sidelined officials from the capital with promises of status, wealth, and opportunity. She wasn't just building an army. She was draining the kingdom's brain power into her own territory. Meanwhile, at the Blackstone Fortress on the Eastern Front, soldiers were freezing in broken armor, eating bread hard as rocks, 3 months without pay. An old soldier named Barton was cursing the nobles in Winter City who forgot about them. Then a messenger came running up the wall, screaming that money had arrived. All back pay, all death benefits, plus a 30,000 bonus for every soldier. Princess's orders, stamped with the Winterhold seal, 60,000 gold coins total, not a single coin missing. The fortress erupted. Soldiers threw down their weapons and hugged each other, laughing and crying. Barton, a 40-year-old veteran, crouched on the ground sobbing, thinking of his dead brothers and the widows waiting for death benefits back home. Someone shouted, "Long live the princess," and tens of thousands of voices joined in, a roar that shook the snow off the frozen plains. From that day on, the North had only one master. Surveya stood on a platform outside Winter City and officially declared the frozen wasteland the site of the heart of Winter Industrial Zone. She gave us 3 months to get the first furnace lit. I put my student Aaron in charge as the zone's first administrator. Surveya remembered him as a bookworm from the academy, but I vouched for him. Solid theory, decent management skills, and he owed me a favor. Aaron had already drawn up the full layout. For zones. First, the smelting area with 3 large magic-powered furnaces capable of producing 50 tons of steel per day. Second, a Magitech parts workshop with 10 assembly lines for armor components. Third, a workers' living area with barracks, a canteen, and a medical station. Fourth, a warehouse and transport hub linked to the city's train station. Surveya approved the plan. Aaron handed me a supply list. We needed huge amounts of magic crystals, alchemical materials, and construction steel. I told Surveya the money was fine, but we'd need new supply channels for magic crystals. She assigned Grayson to handle it. Recruiting workers was easy. Word got out that the project paid wages and provided meals, and the unemployed poor nearly broke down the recruitment office door. Aaron had the good sense to hire literate sons of old craftsmen and fallen merchant families as junior managers. The kid knew how to use people. 3 days in, the site was swarming with hundreds of workers digging trenches in the frozen ground. Aaron ran around with a measuring rod, shouting adjustments. The workers were earning 5 copper coins a day with promises of raises once the factory was running. There was one problem. The magic furnace core components hadn't arrived. Without them, the furnace was useless even if the structure was complete. I told Aaron I'd design a simplified engine myself to get things moving. Back in my lab, I spent hours at the drafting table. I lowered the energy output to rank 3 level but increased stability, borrowed some design principles from the 4th generation armor core, and swapped in cheaper materials. The result was a complex but functional magic array. I built a palm-sized prototype using a fist-sized magic crystal. Lilith brought me tea and asked about the job I'd assigned her, human magic pollution cleanup. She was worried I planned to throw her into the furnace. I told her to relax. Her body converts magical energy into pure ether, which made her perfect for absorbing excess magic pollution around the smelting area. All she had to do was stand near the furnace. She looked relieved, if confused. A week later, the zone was taking shape. The furnace structure was complete and technicians were installing the final magic circuits. Aaron stared up at the steel giant with excitement. The workers had hope in their eyes. Most of them had been homeless or bankrupt before this. I brought the finished engine in a metal box, palm-sized, covered in runes. A simplified version, but enough to do the job. Aaron took it and went to install it. Surveya asked if I thought the plan would work. I told her if we couldn't even pull this off, the North was truly beyond saving. She said I had 0 talent for comforting people. I said I only tell the truth. We stood together under the furnace in the sunset. The golden light turned the frozen ground warm. She said my name quietly, then said thank you. I paused for a second, then looked away. Don't get sentimental. I'm just protecting my investment. She laughed softly. From the furnace, Aaron's voice rang out. Professor, the engine is installed. I looked up at the steel tower. The North's first Magitech factory was about to be born. Aaron ran into trouble. The furnace structure was done, but we needed 50 tons of quality coke, 100 tons of high-grade iron ore, and several alchemical catalysts. He went to the Winter Commerce Guild, the only organization in the North with that kind of supply, and met their chairman, Baroque. Fat man, silk robes, gem-covered rings, friendly smile hiding a knife. Baroque quoted 3 times market price, cash only, no credit. Aaron called it robbery. Baroque shrugged and said if we didn't like it, we could shop elsewhere. Except nobody else in the North could fill an order that size. He had a monopoly, and he knew it. Aaron came back furious and reported everything. Surveya's voice went ice cold. She wanted to send Victor with soldiers to arrest Baroque immediately. I stopped her. Going in with force would solve the immediate problem, but destroy commercial trust. The North was already poor. If we scared off every merchant, nobody would ever do business here again. I told her I'd handle it my way. She stared at me and asked what I planned to do. I just smiled and asked if she thought all I did at St. Arcadia was teach classes. She understood. My connections at the academy went deeper than she'd realized. She agreed to give me a chance, but warned that if I failed, she'd do things her way. That night, Baroque was celebrating with his inner circle over wine and food. They were sure Surveya would cave eventually. Their plan was simple. If she used force, they'd report her to the capital for oppressing merchants. Once she was desperate enough, they'd demand she repeal the new tax laws and hand over control of the industrial zone. While they were toasting their supposed victory, I sat in my study with a magic communicator. I activated the crystal and a young man's face appeared, surprised to hear from me. "Phoenix," I said, "I need a small favor." The man on the communicator was Phoenix de Auguste, golden hair, purple eyes, and a mouth that never stopped. He laughed and called me a bookworm buried in northern snow. I ignored the teasing and gave him the list. 5,000 tons of quality coke, 3,000 tons of high-grade iron ore, 3 large forging press machines, and 5 Magitech assembly line setups. I wanted it at cost plus 10%, with a long-term supply deal. Phoenix didn't even hesitate. He called it a small favor. He said he'd reroute his fleet immediately, bypass the capital's middlemen, and ship everything straight to Winterport through the Eastern Sea. First batch in 3 days. I offered him 1% of Heart of Winter's future shares as payment. He waved it off. He reminded me that years ago, I'd saved his family from a curse that would have wiped out their bloodline. He said his life belonged to me, and if I ever mentioned payment again, our friendship was over. I said okay and ended the call. Lilith stood there with her jaw hanging open. The Auguste family, the Golden Griffin clan, controlled more than half the kingdom's shipping and had wealth to rival nations. And their heir owed me his life. Grayson's hands were shaking when I handed him the shipping route. He'd heard every word. Phoenix de Auguste was someone even the capital's prime minister treated with respect, and this man acted like my casual drinking buddy. I told Grayson to prepare Winterport for receiving the cargo, and to let Aaron know everything would be resolved in 3 days. 3 days later, Baroque was sitting in his office sipping imported tea, feeling smug. No word from the Duke's mansion. He was already planning his demands: triple prices, repeal the tax reform, and a stake in the industrial zone. Then one of his people burst through the door, white-faced and barely able to speak. 3 fleets had arrived at Winterport, Golden Griffin banners. The entire harbor was packed with ships. Mountains of coke, iron, ore, and machine parts nobody in the north had ever seen before were being unloaded. And the Auguste Trading Company announced that all their goods would be sold to northern residents at 70% of market price, unlimited quantity. Baroque's teacup slipped from his hand and shattered on the carpet. 70% of market price with unlimited supply wasn't business. It was an execution. The Winter Commerce Guild's entire power came from their resource monopoly. That monopoly had just been obliterated by a force they couldn't begin to fight. Every merchant in the city who'd sided with Baroque scrambled to cut ties with him. They ran to the guild to cancel all partnerships, then sprinted to the Duke's mansion. Within half an hour, dozens of the city's wealthiest merchants were kneeling on the cold stone steps outside, begging to see the princess, offering to serve the industrial zone at the lowest possible prices. Surveya didn't even bother meeting the groveling merchants herself. She sent Grayson. He stood over them on the cold steps and read out the orders. First, all goods from the Golden Griffin fleet would be purchased by the Duke's office and resold at 70% of market price through a distribution network run by these same merchants. Second, a new tax audit squad would reassess every business, farm, and mine they owned, and they'd have to pay 3 years of back taxes under the new system. One merchant fainted on the spot. Grayson told them to remember who ran the north. Surveya knew the Golden Griffin fleet was a powerful lever, but external help wouldn't last forever. She needed her own system. She started building it piece by piece. She promoted Grayson to permanent finance chief and appointed his 2 assistants, Martin and Colin, as heads of taxation and commerce. Martin's plan was to force all shops onto standardized ledgers with resident auditors to prevent fraud. Colin proposed creating a Northern Development Bank, using the seized cash as reserves to issue low-interest loans to workshop owners and farmers, making money generate more money. Surveya gave them authority and told them she expected results. That evening, she invited a handful of old noble families who'd stayed neutral during the purge, families that had even been bullied by the executed clans. She didn't threaten them. She offered them honorary positions on a city construction advisory council and an agricultural improvement board. No real power, but acceptance from the new ruler. They accepted gratefully. Then Victor brought files on soldiers from common backgrounds who'd earned their rank through blood and bravery at Blackstone Fortress. Surveya told him her personal guard didn't care about bloodlines, only loyalty and ability. Victor slammed his fist against his chest plate with pride. Government, commerce, military, 3 pillars, all in place within weeks. Meanwhile, I stayed out of all of it. I spent my days in the top-floor lab, running experiments on Lilith. She sat in a metal chair with glowing restraint rings on her wrists and ankles while I circled her with a recording crystal, studying how her body converted magical energy directly into pure ether. I summoned streams of fire near her and watched them dissolve. The principle was fascinating. I couldn't stop talking about it. Lilith said she felt uncomfortable. I told her to be quiet. Surveya came by after finishing her daily work, as she'd started doing regularly. She stepped around scattered parts and half-drawn magic circles, found a new furnace blueprint I'd sketched on the work table, far more efficient than anything Aaron had. She asked if it was for him. I said I'd drawn it casually, and he could throw it away if he couldn't understand it. She folded it up carefully without another word. In just half a month, Winter City had transformed. Patrols were sharp, officials stopped making excuses, even dockworkers had hope on their faces. People started calling Surveya the true master of the North. Not that princess from the capital. One quiet afternoon, the obsidian badge in my pocket vibrated. It was Professor Seals with results on the gold bar trace. He'd used star chart tracking and material origin tracing. Every lead was crystal clear, no interference at all. In divination, that's actually the most suspicious thing possible. All paths pointed to one source, the Third Royal Mint of the Valeria Empire, our kingdom's oldest enemy. Too clean. Too obvious. Seals agreed. An organization capable of planning a precise assassination on a princess wouldn't leave such a blatant trail. It looked like a framed job, someone using imperial gold to redirect blame toward Valeria. I raised the critical question. How did the assassins know Surveya's travel route? It was decided at the last minute, known only to a handful of people at the highest level in the capital. Seals said the word I was already thinking, a mole. Someone in a powerful position who wanted war between the two nations. They leaked Surveya's route to the killers and planted imperial gold as evidence, hoping to aim our kingdom's fury at the empire. But who benefits from war? A prince eyeing the throne? Arms dealers and nobles who profit from conflict? Or was the real mastermind actually inside the empire, deliberately using clumsy evidence, so we'd assume it was an internal frame job and lower our guard against them? Layer upon layer. Impossible to tell truth from deception yet. Seals warned me to be careful. The storm in the north was just the beginning, and the path I'd chosen was 10,000 times more dangerous than any academy research. After the call, I pulled out the prophecy book. It had been roughly 10 days since the last refresh. New text had appeared on a blank page. In 1 week, a person who will overturn the world will appear at the Dragon Mountains. The Dragon Mountains, the frozen barrier between our kingdom and the northern barbarian wastes, legendary nesting ground of dragons. Who was this world-changing person? Meanwhile, down in the lower district of Winter City, life was transforming. A worker named Josen hauled coal at the heart of Winterside, earning more in a day than he used to make farming in a month. The factory fed him twice daily, black bread and meat soup with real bits of meat. Streets were cleaner, patrols were sharper, and fresh bread was in the bakeries. That evening, Josen's 7-year-old son Jory carefully split a white bread loaf into 3 pieces, the smallest for himself, then sat reading a worn church primer he'd found in the trash. He already knew every word in it by heart. "Dad," the boy said, eyes shining. "I want to go to school." Josen's heart ached. Education was a privilege for the rich. Nobles had tutors, wealthy families sent children to knight academies, and the gifted could reach Saint Arcadia. Common people could only go to church schools, which cost, offering fees they couldn't afford. Jory said he'd heard people talk about how knowledge was power, that the scholar Logharis beside the princess could build amazing factories because of what he knew. The boy whispered that he wanted to become someone with that kind of power too. I was walking through the construction site with Aaron when I stopped at a muddy clearing. A dozen children, the oldest maybe 10, the youngest 5 or 6, were throwing mud at each other in ragged clothes, faces filthy, noses running in the cold. Their parents were working on the site. Nobody was watching them. I stared at them and thought about the prophecy book's words, a person who will overturn the world. I didn't know who that was, but I knew one thing. A north full of people who couldn't read would never change anything. It would only be crushed. That evening I put a plan on Surveya's desk. Free basic education for every child in the north between 6 and 16. Reading, writing, arithmetic, basic science. Grayson objected immediately. 50 teachers minimum, hundreds of desks, mountains of paper and ink, and zero financial return. In this kingdom, education had always been a privilege of the rich. Free schooling for the poor sounded like a joke. I asked him how many people it takes to maintain one Magitech power armor. At least 30 literate workers who can read a basic repair manual, plus one engineer who understands Magitech principles. Without them, that 3,000 coin war machine is scrap metal. A qualified Magitech engineer takes 10 years to train. What I was proposing was planting seeds. In 10 years, the North would harvest tens of thousands of literate workers, thousands of craftsmen, and hundreds of engineers. That was the cheapest and most priceless investment possible. Surveya was quiet for a moment. Then she ordered Grayson to allocate 500,000 gold coins from the seized assets as startup funding. She named the school Northern Enlightenment Academy and made me honorary headmaster. 3 days later, the announcement went up across the city. Free education, free lunch for every enrolled child. But the response was disappointing. Most common people didn't trust it. They said their kids earned 2 copper coins a day picking up coal at the docks. Who'd replace that income? They said reading couldn't fill your stomach. Better to apprentice early and learn a trade. On the first day of registration, almost nobody showed up. Almost nobody, except a worker named Josen. He was the first in line, gripping his son Jory's hand so hard his whole body was shaking. When the official checked Jory's name and handed over the enrollment tag, this man who hauled 100-pound loads without flinching had tears in his eyes. Jory asked if he could really go to school. Josen knelt down and told him yes. But their joy was a tiny spark in a cold city. The real resistance came from above. Former nobles gathered in a fancy tavern, furious. One of them, the Chief Justice's cousin, slammed his wine glass down and ranted that if commoners learned to read, nobody would farm their land or dig their mines. They called it the destruction of the social order. Then came a quieter, more powerful response. A gray-robed priest from the Holy Church arrived at the Duke's mansion. He congratulated Surveya on her good works, then politely reminded her that educating the masses had always been the Church's divine right and responsibility. They had church schools across the north already. A secular government interfering too much in God's domain, he suggested, might weaken the people's faith. When the Church's representative came to lecture Surveya about the school, I happened to walk in. I didn't even look at him. I grabbed some documents and turned to leave. He tried to introduce himself. I asked who he was. He said he was a deacon from the cathedral. I called him a fraud and told him I hated talking to 2 kinds of people, idiots and religious charlatans. He sputtered about insult to the clergy. I reminded him that a few years ago, his Inquisition tried to drag me to the stake over an academic paper. I told him to go back to his bishop and say I'd do whatever I wanted in the north, and if they sent anyone else to bother me, I'd show their cathedral what an arcane explosion feels like. I walked out without looking back. He left shaking with rage. But my confrontation didn't fix the real problem. Days passed, and almost nobody enrolled. The old nobles were sabotaging us. One of them sent people to the countryside spreading rumors that the school was a front for kidnapping children as magical sacrifices. The ignorant believed it. The church came back 3 days later, this time dropping all pretense of friendliness. The deacon coldly told Surveya that if she continued, the church would withdraw from the north entirely, taking their hospitals, plague blessings, and spiritual services with them. The North's medical system depended heavily on them. Even Victor gently suggested postponing the school to focus on military development. That night, Surveya sat alone in her study, staring at the dark sky, genuinely tired for the first time. I found her there. She told me the situation. Commoners wouldn't come, nobles were blocking us, the church was threatening. Everyone thought knowledge was worthless. I stood beside her and said, "Then we put a price tag on knowledge. Not just free. We'd pay them." I proposed the Enlightenment Scholarship. Every child who enrolled would receive 10 silver deer coins per month, enough to cover the family's lost labor income. Top students each semester would get 5 gold lion coins as a bonus. I wanted to see whether real money or empty fear was more powerful. The next day, the new announcement went up across the city. The effect was instant. The lower district exploded. 10 silver coins a month was more than kids earned picking coal at the docks. 5 gold coins could feed a family for half a year. Parents who'd been terrified of the school days ago were now dragging, carrying, and shoving their children toward the registration office. The line stretched from one end of the street to the other. The man who'd been spreading kidnapping rumors got pulled out of the crowd and nearly beaten to death. The Chief Justice's cousin smashed his favorite vase in rage, screaming about ungrateful peasants abandoning their place for a handful of coins. He couldn't understand it. When the church deacon returned to condemn us for defiling the sanctity of knowledge with money, I met him personally. I took him to see the school. He saw classrooms packed with children whose eyes burned with a hunger for learning he'd never witnessed in any church school. He saw a mother outside clutching her 10 silver coins, sobbing with gratitude, holding on to an official's leg. He saw a father using the stipend to buy his child a warm coat for the first time in the boy's life. Every prepared word of condemnation died in his throat. I leaned in and asked him quietly, "God loves all people. Shouldn't he be happy to see his children live better lives and open their eyes to the world?" Then my voice went cold. Or does the church just want its followers to stay blind forever, because that makes them easier to control? He went white. His lips trembled. Then he practically fled. With the industrial framework set up and Aaron handling daily operations, I finally had time for my own research. I'd been spending 3 days in my private alchemy workshop trying to recreate a legendary Fountain of Youth potion from an old text. The experiment reached its final step, fusing the life essence of several core materials. I guided a thread of magic into the crystal flask, but the liquid went dark and turned to sludge. Failure. It wasn't the formula or my technique. Regular magic simply couldn't serve as the binding agent for the final fusion. I needed something inherently overflowing with life force, a catalyst. One name came to mind, Dragon Bloodstone, a gem that only forms where dragons lived or died, soaked in dragon blood and earth energy for over 1,000 years. And the prophecy book's latest entry echoed in my head. In 1 week, a person who will overturn the world will appear at the Dragon Mountains, whether for the alchemy material or to verify the prophecy. I had to go. I cleaned my Magitech gun, packed high-purity ether crystals, sorted alchemical potions, and survival gear. Then I went to the Duke's study. Surveya was dozing at her desk, exhausted from weeks of non-stop governance, tax reform, military rebuilding, political maneuvering. I told her I needed to travel to the Dragon Mountains for an important experiment. I didn't mention the prophecy, too vague, possibly a trap. She didn't argue. She knew that when I said something mattered in that flat tone, there was no discussion. She stood up, walked over, and straightened my collar. "Winter isn't over yet. The mountains will be colder. Be careful." Then I went to collect Lilith. She'd been having an easy time lately. I'd paused my research on her anti-magic body after hitting dead ends, and she only had to clean up magic pollution at the industrial site. When she opened her door humming a tune with a new hair ribbon, her smile froze the moment she saw my face. I told her to pack. We were going to the Dragon Mountains. She wanted to refuse. Every mercenary knew that place was a death trap full of monsters and magical hazards. But then she remembered the miniature sun I'd created on the train, and the soul contract burned in reminder. She packed in minutes. At an empty alley, I grabbed her shoulder and activated long-range spatial transfer. The world twisted around us. When her feet hit solid ground again, we were dozens of miles outside Winter City on the frozen plains. Lilith grabbed a dead tree and dry-heaved. face white as paper. She begged me to use horses next time. I ignored her. I looked toward the horizon where the Dragon Mountains rose like the spine of some ancient sleeping beast, snow-covered peaks glinting cold white in the morning sun. Let's go? We don't have much time. I stepped into the ankle-deep snow and headed toward the Dragon Mountains. Lilith sighed and followed. Half a day in, we hit our first trouble. A pack of magic wolves the size of calves burst from the snow forest. I told Lilith to handle it quickly. She drew her steel daggers and transformed from a whiny miser into a cold, efficient killer. She tore through the pack in under a minute without even activating her anti-magic field, slitting throats and puncturing eyes with surgical precision. She jogged back looking pleased with herself. I said, and kept walking. She pouted. We pushed deeper, clearing a few more waves of beasts along the way. Nothing worth mentioning for a peak rank 5 mage and a rank 6 assassin. Then I stopped at an open snowfield. I felt it, chaotic ether waves ahead. High-intensity magic and blade work. Someone was fighting, and the level wasn't low. I activated a concealment spell that erased our presence completely. Sight, sound, scent, everything. We crept behind a snow-covered boulder, and I looked out at the battlefield. 7 or 8 assassins in black bodysuits and metal masks were surrounding 2 people. The assassins were subhumans. I could see pointed beast ears and tails. They moved fast, coordinated, and vicious. The 2 being attacked were a man and a girl. The girl looked about 16 or 17, with striking black hair and ruby-red eyes. She was firing off spells from a fancy staff, fireballs, ice spikes, wind blades, all flashy but sloppy. Her magic control was rough, her casting was slow, and she had no strategy. Several times, she nearly hit her own companion. My professional assessment: all show, no substance. The man was doing the real work. Tall, golden-haired, handsome, but pale and bleeding. His arms and neck were covered in fine golden scales, and his eyes were green dragon pupils. A dragon subhuman. He wielded a heavy sword, blocking attack after attack to keep the girl safe behind him. But he was running out of steam, more wounds appearing, movements slowing, every breath heavy. The girl, Alice, she called herself, was yelling at him to use his trump card. She complained the contract didn't say anything about running through mountains being chased by tailed wild dogs. He told her to run while he held them off. She refused, saying if he died, she'd have nobody to collect the rest of her payment from. The assassin leader lost patience and sent 3 of his people around the Dragon Man to attack Alice directly. The Dragon Man tried to break free but got pinned down. 3 glinting daggers closed in on her. She screamed, more angry than scared, and threw a handful of flash dust from her belt pouch, trying to blind them. Behind our boulder, Lilith had her hand on her dagger, ready to move. She looked at me for orders. I was studying the Dragon Man. Golden scales. In the subhuman empire, bloodline determined status, and among dragon subhumans, gold dragon blood was the most noble, the mark of royalty. A young man with gold dragon blood, traveling with a mage girl, being hunted by mysterious subhuman assassins in the Dragon Mountains. The information here was enormous. I glanced at the assassins. Rank 4 at best. Confirmed, cannon fodder. Get ready to move. Alice's flash dust exploded in a burst of blinding light, freezing the assassins for a split second. That's when I stepped out. I walked out of the snowstorm calmly, letting my magical pressure radiate freely. It wasn't physical cold. It was something deeper, a crushing sense of dominance that locked every person on that battlefield in place. The nearest assassin's poisoned dagger snapped at the tip and fell silently into the snow. He stared at his broken weapon in horror. I cleaned my glasses with a cloth, surveyed the scene, and said, "Inefficient combat. Waste of time." The assassin leader ordered them all to attack me. Lilith peeked out from behind a tree, silently mourned them for about 1 second, then started calculating how much their equipment was worth. I didn't chant, didn't gesture, didn't move. The snow beneath the charging assassins erupted. 7 or 8 massive black ice coffins covered in strange runes burst from the ground and swallowed every single one of them in an instant. The lids slammed shut with heavy thuds. 1 second they were mid-attack, the next they were frozen statues sealed in dark ice, scattered across the snowfield like grotesque monuments. No explosions, no shockwaves. Just absolute, silent power. Alice was face down in the snow with her mouth hanging open. For the first time in what I assumed was her entire life, she had nothing to say. The dragon man Alectoris was on one knee, gasping, but I could tell from his eyes that he understood exactly how far above them I was. Alice recovered fast. She scrambled over to check on Alectoris, pulled healing potions from her alchemy pouch, and immediately started trash-talking the frozen assassins. Then she spotted me. Approaching, shoved the injured dragon man behind her, pointed her staff at me, and yelled that she had no money and I better not try to rob them. Rob them? Right. My personal savings could probably buy a small country. I ignored her and studied Alectoris. Golden dragon scales. In the subhuman empire, that meant royal blood. A gold dragon prince being hunted by subhuman assassins in the Dragon Mountains. He didn't try to hide it. He introduced himself as Alectoris Radiance Mark, imperial royalty, and said the pursuit was due to internal power struggles. Smart. Lying to someone who'd just effortlessly annihilated his enemies would have been foolish. Alice explained how they met. She'd been fishing in a river and pulled him out instead of a fish, unconscious, covered in wounds. She saved him because his clothes looked expensive. He promised her a large sum to escort him to the Dragon Mountains to find something. She took the job for the money, and instead got chased by assassins every day with no pay in sight. I filed away the key facts. A subhuman prince, fleeing to the Dragon Mountains, at exactly the time and place the prophecy book described. Could he be the person who will overturn the world? Too early to tell. Prophecies are full of word traps and misdirection. I told them their situation was bad. This was only the first wave of pursuers. More would come. They couldn't survive the mountains alone. I knew a hidden, safe location deeper in the range where they could rest. Alice demanded to know what I wanted in return. No free lunches. Mercenary rule number 1. But Alectoris spoke up first. He said they had no choice. If I'd wanted to harm them, I wouldn't have bothered with conversation. I nodded. Keep up. I turned and walked deeper into the mountains. Lilith trotted after me. Alice stomped her foot, cursed under her breath about me obviously being a kidnapper and murderer, then hauled the limping Alectoris along behind us, muttering the whole way that if they died, his ghost better go haunt me because she sure couldn't beat me herself. We disappeared into the blowing snow. I led the group through knee-deep snow for an hour until we reached a broken-down hunter's cabin hidden behind boulders. Alice complained it looked worse than a sieve. Alectoris was too weak to talk. Alice tried to light a fire with her magic. She produced a fireball that hit the damp floor and filled the entire cabin with choking black smoke. She made it worse trying to wave it away with her staff. I couldn't watch anymore. I pulled some metal plates, wires, and a low-grade magic crystal from my pack. A few clicks later, I pressed the crystal into a small device I'd assembled on the spot. It hummed to life, radiating steady, smokeless warmth that filled the cabin in seconds. Then I pointed at the holes in the walls and said, "Material restructure." The wood fibers crawled and grew on their own, sealing every gap perfectly. I pointed at an empty bucket and condensed drinking water from the air. No incantations, no staff, no wasted energy. Alice stood there with her mouth open. Alectoris looked at me with deep awe. I told the dragon man to sit down so I could examine his wounds. The cuts were deep, nearly to bone, but that wasn't the real problem. Beneath the torn flesh, black energy threads were writhing like living things, devouring his life force and preventing healing. Alice said she'd used the best potions available. They only slowed it down. I touched the black threads with a pinpoint of pure magic. They recoiled like they'd been burned. I analyzed the feedback in seconds. Composite decay curse, I said. Old technique. A mix of necromancy and blood-targeted erosion designed specifically for your lineage. Whoever cast this didn't just want you dead, they wanted you to suffer as your life drained away. Alectoris smiled bitterly. He wasn't surprised. He called it blood withering, one of the most powerful curses in the world, the work of a dark mage serving the Hawk Prince. He estimated he had less than half a year to live. He told me everything. About 6 months ago, his father, the emperor who advocated peace between all races, was overthrown in a coup by his uncle, Prince Remington, leader of the Hawks. Alectoris, as the figurehead of the peace faction, became a target. During one ambush, the dark mage planted this curse in him. He came to the Dragon Mountain searching for an ancient dragon heritage site that only opens for his Radiance Mark bloodline. Family records said the site contained ancestral dragon knowledge that might hold a cure. I told him bluntly that in his current condition, he couldn't find anything. A random winter wolf outside the mountains could eat him alive. He didn't get angry. He asked for my help. His offer: escort him to the heritage site and help him complete the inheritance. In return, everything inside the ruins, ancient knowledge manuscripts, rare alchemical materials, sealed magical artifacts, was mine to take. He only needed one bloodline token. Lilith gasped. An entire ancient dragon ruin, handed over to a stranger he'd known for hours. My expression didn't change, but my mind had already finished calculating. A dragon heritage site meant vast ancient knowledge, unknown magical systems, and high-level alchemical materials. The dragon bloodstone I needed for my youth potion would almost certainly be there. And the prophecies, person who will overturn the world, might be connected to this dragon inheritance. I looked at the desperate prince. Deal. The next morning, a second pursuit team arrived at yesterday's battlefield. Their leader, a peak rank 4 wolf warrior named Carl, found my black ice coffins standing in the snow. 8 frozen assassins preserved in their final moments of terror. He touched one coffin and yanked his hand back from the bone-deep cold. He made the smart call: abandon the chase, record everything, and report back. He knew following us meant death. We pushed deeper into the mountains. Behind me, Alice was scolding Alec Taurus for giving away an entire dragon ruin to someone he'd just met. He told her a ruin he could never reach was worth nothing, and my help was priceless. She glanced at my back, snow parting around me without any visible shield, and grudgingly admitted she felt safe for the first time since the chase began. Lilith was doing her own math, dreaming about scraps from the ruin making her rich enough to buy an estate. The deeper we went, the denser and wilder the ambient ether became. Eventually I stopped. We'd arrived. There was nothing visible, just snow and jagged rocks. But Alec Taurus closed his eyes and confirmed his blood was resonating. The entrance was here, hidden behind an ancient dragon-tongue maze array that warped space and perception. One wrong step could teleport you 1,000 miles into a death zone. Alice suggested blasting through with magic. I told her that would destabilize the array and tear us all to pieces in spatial turbulence. I could spend hours decoding it properly. But I had a faster idea. I looked at Lilith. I pointed at the array's core node and told her to hit it with everything she had. Her anti-magic nullification power, full force, at that exact spot. She protested that using her nullifier ability on a maze array's core was like performing heart surgery with a battering ram. I told her I'd handle the calculations. She just needed to deliver the output. Did she really want to stand in the cold for hours instead? She grumbled, stepped forward, and gathered a sphere of light-devouring dark energy between her hands. On my command, she launched it. Space shattered like a broken mirror. Black cracks spread from the impact point, tearing open an unstable, writhing passage. I grabbed Alice, shoved her and Alec Taurus through, Lilith dove in after, and I stepped through last. The rift collapsed and vanished behind me. On the other side, Alec Taurus felt his blood burning with recognition. He walked to a dragon-shaped stone relief half buried in snow, bit his finger, and let a drop of golden blood fall onto the carving's eye. A deafening rumble shook the ground. Massive stone doors began to open, releasing a wave of ancient air thick with dust and the weight of ages. The ancient dragon ruin stood open before us. The stone doors opened, and what lay beyond wasn't a cave or tomb. It was a city, an entire city frozen in ice. A massive ice crystal dome covered the sky, filtering light into a dreamlike blue. Beneath it, wide streets, towering halls, and spires stretched to the horizon, all perfectly preserved in eternal ice. Dragon skeletons lay scattered on the streets, some curled as if sleeping, others frozen mid-roar, their enormous frames turned into monuments of this dead city. The ambient ether was so dense it tingled on the skin. Alice lost the ability to speak. Alec Taurus trembled, staring at the dragon bones with grief etched deep in his blood, a descendant standing in his ancestors' graveyard. Lilith was shaking too, but her eyes were scanning the frozen weapons, armor, and treasures, her brain calculating values at maximum speed. My reaction was different. I felt pure academic excitement. I rushed to an ice wall covered in dragon script and pulled out a blank recording crystal. The energy system was brilliant. It used geothermal heat from below and extreme cold from above to create a perpetual temperature differential. The cold preserved and defended. The heat powered the city's rune arrays. The ice dome overhead was a giant ether lens that gathered, filtered, and distributed free-floating ether automatically. A completely closed, self-sustaining energy network. Genius design. Everything here was built to dragon scale. Doorways 15 meters tall, plazas the size of small planes. At the center stood a 100-meter-tall black stone wall, perfectly free of ice, its surface covered in silver glowing dragon script. I didn't need to decode it. Ancient dragon language was like a mother tongue to me. I read the inscription aloud. Stars fell. The gods broke their oath. The sky wailed, the earth wept. When mortals pry into the secrets of ether, dragons shall open their eyes from slumber and judge the ants who played with fire. The world turns in cycles. Only blood and knowledge endure. I paused slightly at Secrets of Ether. Something stirred behind my glasses that nobody noticed. The moment I finished reading, every symbol on the wall exploded with light. Allectorus screamed as an invisible force yanked him off the ground and pulled him toward the stone. Golden scales flickered wildly across his skin. Alice tried to get closer, but an invisible barrier pushed her back gently. I told them not to worry. This wasn't an attack. It was a bloodline awakening ritual. He would either transform inside or be consumed. It was his trial to face alone. Meanwhile, I pulled out my analysis instruments and started recording. The process was fascinating. It wasn't simple energy infusion, but advanced particle-level restructuring of his blood factors. Evolution or disintegration, one or the other. The light swallowed Allectorus completely. His screaming stopped. A gate of pure light opened in the wall, drew him in, and vanished. The symbols went dark. Silence returned. Alice asked what happened to her investment if he didn't come back. I told her his life signs had disappeared from this spatial coordinate. Either he'd been transported somewhere else, or broken down into base particles. She shuddered. Broken into particles? Not even dust left. Let's hope he's lucky. I was already looking at the massive side building across the plaza, a structure radiating the unmistakable presence of ancient knowledge. While we wait, the library should be open to us now. I walked toward it. We might as well find something to do. While Alice paced and Lilith scratched at the ice out of boredom, the black stone wall lit up again. Allectorus stumbled out and collapsed to one knee, gasping. He was transformed. His golden scales were denser and brighter, his horns longer and sharper, and a phantom dragon tail, made of pure energy, swayed behind him. His aura had jumped from rank 3 to rank 4, a dragon blood knight. Alice immediately forgot all her complaints and started poking his horns, saying he looked much more expensive now. He said he didn't fully understand what happened inside. Just flashes of images flooding his mind. Then he was back. The curse was still there, but suppressed. I scanned him and confirmed. The stronger bloodline power had covered the rot like a bandage, but the root remained. His time had extended from half a year to roughly 5 years. He wasn't disappointed. 5 years was enough. He bowed formally and honored our deal. Everything in the ruins was mine except his bloodline token. I was already walking toward the massive side building. With the trial complete, its seals had lifted. Inside, Lilith's fantasies of gold mountains shattered instantly. No treasure piles, just towering shelves filled with countless memory crystals glowing softly. And at the center, a complete set of dragon alchemical equipment more advanced than anything humanity had ever built. Lilith slumped in a corner, devastated by the pile of rocks. Alice, being a mage, understood what these knowledge crystals truly were. A library that would drive every magical organization on the continent insane with desire. I touched the crystals one by one. Information flooded into my mind at inhuman speed. Dragon magical structure theory, dragon alchemy, even dragon mechanical engineering. These ancient dragons might have been a genuine advanced civilization. My fingers flew across shelf after shelf, sorting, categorizing, absorbing everything. Alice and Allectorus watched from the doorway, speechless. They'd never seen anyone read like this. Then I stopped at a remote shelf. I pulled down an ancient, cracked memory crystal from the top, and pressed it to my forehead. Forbidden chapter of life alchemy. My breath caught. Theories of life force fusion, soul grafting, bloodline restructuring. Mad, blasphemous ideas that were simultaneously precise and logically beautiful. Failed experiments, successful cases, and then, in a section about fusing incompatible supreme life force materials, I found the word I'd been searching for. Dragon's breath. A dragon-created super catalyst that could perfectly harmonize opposing life energies and merge them into something entirely new and higher. The full recipe and crafting method were right there. And the core ingredient needed to make it was just one thing. Dragon bloodstone. I opened my eyes, barely containing my excitement. I strode to the alchemical equipment at the center and opened a material storage drawer. Inside lay a fist-sized stone, deep blood red, with what looked like magma flowing slowly within it, radiating warm, immense life force. A dragon bloodstone of a quality beyond anything described in any text I'd ever read. I picked it up and ran my fingers over its surface. For the first time since this journey began, I smiled. Every theoretical gap, every missing material needed to recreate the fountain of youth elixir, all filled in this single moment. Meanwhile, Alectoris stood quietly with a troubled expression. During his inheritance, he'd seen something disturbing. The dark mage who cursed him had a mark on his arm, twisted vines and skulls. Alectoris recognized it from the deepest forbidden histories in the dragon memory. It didn't belong to the Hawk faction or any part of the subhuman empire. It belonged to the corruption cult, an ancient evil organization believed to have been extinct for 1,000 years. He clenched his fists but said nothing. This secret was too enormous. Until he understood more, telling an outsider like me would only create unpredictable consequences. This was his war to fight. I pocketed the dragon bloodstone and told everyone I was done. Lilith's eyes lit up, thinking it was time to loot freely. I walked through the dragon city, the treasury, the armory, the material vaults. Mountains of gold coins, enormous gems, priceless artifacts. I picked things up, examined them, gave cold technical assessments, and put them back. The gold was too impure for Magitech use. I only took a few fingernail-sized samples of rare metals and crystals from the material stores. Lilith's emotions went from ecstasy to confusion to complete bewilderment. She couldn't understand why I'd ignore wealth that could buy 10 kingdoms. Then I pulled out an empty storage ring. With a wave of my hand, I swept everything into it. Weapons, armor, knowledge crystals, gold, silver materials. The entire city stripped clean in minutes. Lilith's jaw dropped. So I did want it all. Then I walked up to Alectoris and handed him the ring. Everyone froze. Alice shouted first. Lilith nearly passed out. I told him simply. This was his ancestor's legacy, and it belonged to him. I'd only taken what I needed, the dragon bloodstone, the knowledge, and a few samples. That was enough. Alectoris stared at me, stunned. He'd imagined every possible outcome except this one. A man powerful enough to take everything, choosing to give it back. Something broke inside him, his last wall of caution toward me. He knelt in the oldest dragon oath ceremony, fist to chest, forehead touching his hand. He swore on his ancestors' names that I was his eternal friend and benefactor. Lilith crouched on the ground, hugging her head, her worldview shattered. All that gold, just hand it away. I pulled Alectoris to his feet. I told him I didn't need his loyalty. I needed a reliable ally. Then I got to the point. The Hawks wouldn't stop hunting him. Next time they'd send real fighters, maybe the prince himself. He couldn't hide in these mountains forever. I told him I was the chief advisor to Princess Cervea, acting governor of the north in the human kingdom. I invited him to seek shelter there. The air went still. A subhuman prince going to human territory, it sounded insane. Alice exploded, accusing me of wanting to dissect him in a lab. She had deep prejudice against humans. Alectoris hesitated too. His dragon horns, tail, and aura would cause a diplomatic crisis the moment anyone saw him. I told him appearance was just a technical problem. I cast a concealment spell on him. His horns vanished, his dragon tail disappeared, his overwhelming presence shrank to that of an ordinary large human. Perfect disguise. He looked at his normal-seeming hands and made his decision. Fine, I'll go to the north with you. I opened a spatial gate on the spot. Through it, the familiar snow of Winter City was visible. Lilith trudged through with one last mournful look at the frozen dragon city. Alice grumbled the entire way but followed Alectoris. The four of us stepped through. The gate closed behind us, and the ancient dragon city returned to its eternal silence. I wasn't there, but the pieces came together later. In the subhuman empire's capital, Regent Prince Remington sat on his brother's stolen throne, furious. Half a year since he'd staged his coup, framed the old emperor's assassination on Alectoris, and the prince had vanished completely. Every scout, spy, and general had failed to find him. Remington knew that as long as Alectoris lived, he'd never be more than a usurper. The hidden doves in his court were just waiting for the rightful heir to return. Then his tracker Carl reported back from the Dragon Mountains with footage of my ice coffins. 8 frozen assassins locked in expressions of pure terror. Carl estimated the caster was at least peak rank 5 and admitted his team didn't dare pursue further. Remington smashed the crystal in rage. A mysterious high-rank mage protecting his nephew was a variable he hadn't planned for. After everyone left, a figure in a gray cloak emerged from the shadows. This was the real puppet master, someone from the corruption cult, the ancient organization Alectoris had glimpsed in the dragon inheritance. The gray-robed man suggested that chasing Alectoris was no longer the best strategy. Instead, Remington needed a crisis big enough to unite all subhumans behind him and make everyone forget the runaway prince. War. Not a full-scale conflict, just a targeted, limited campaign against a rich, isolated territory that had just gotten a new, inexperienced ruler. The North. The gray-robed man laid it out. Remington would rally the Hawks under the banner of imperial expansion. The fence-sitters would have to support him. Anyone still loyal to Alectoris would be branded a traitor. The cult's agents had already infiltrated the North and could provide intelligence, manufacture a perfect excuse for invasion, and even use divine blessings to strengthen Remington's army. Remington knew he was dealing with devils, but he was desperate enough to gamble everything. He agreed. He ordered 3 legions to mass at the northern border under the cover of clearing human bandits. He issued a public decree accusing Alectoris of defecting to the human kingdom and conspiring with the northern lord to split the empire. A bounty of 10,000 gold and a noble title for any information. War clouds drifted south toward the north. And in Winter City, we knew nothing about the storm heading our way. We stepped out of the spatial gate into a back alley in Winter City. Alice immediately started complaining about the cold. Alectoris, disguised as a tall human thanks to my spell, took a deep breath and looked around the unfamiliar city with a mix of anxiety and determination. The streets had changed since I'd left. More people, more energy. Children laughing, vendors calling out, the distant rumble of machines from the industrial zone. The city was coming alive. Then we ran into Victor. The old general took one look at Alectoris and his hand went to his sword. After decades on the border fighting subhumans, he could recognize imperial royalty even through magical disguise. The oversized frame, the occasional flash of golden eyes, the bearing of someone who'd never feared an army. His soldiers surrounded us instantly, weapons drawn. Alectoris gripped his sword. Alice clutched a fire crystal. Lilith hid behind me. I stepped between Victor and Alectoris, calm as always. I told him this was my guest, an important ally for the princess, and I was taking him to see her. Victor's I didn't leave Alectoris for a second. He said he'd spent his whole life reading subhuman royalty, and anyone from the Radiance Mark bloodline could mean war. I told him his caution was correct, but my judgment had never been wrong either. I offered to let him escort us personally to the Duke's mansion. That gave him a way to do his duty without blocking me. After a few tense seconds, he released his sword and ordered his men to stand down. He walked us through the city to the mansion, his one good eye fixed on Alectoris the entire way. In the council room, Surveya was buried in paperwork. I'd already briefed her through a communication crystal on the way. She looked up, glanced past Victor, and locked onto the disguised dragon prince immediately. Only you could bring me something like this, she said with a hint of sarcasm, though her eyes held nothing but sharp calculation. I shrugged and introduced everyone. This is Alectoris, former prince of the subhuman empire, currently being hunted across the world by his uncle. I pointed at Alice. And this one I picked up on the road. A noisy nobody. Alice exploded. You're the nobody, you four-eyed bookworm. Alectoris stepped forward, and gave Surveya a proper noble bow. He told her everything. The coup, his father's imprisonment, Regent Remington's false accusations, the assassination attempts, and his desire for peace rather than war. He spoke plainly, no exaggeration, just facts. Surveya listened quietly, fingers tracing the edge of the table while her mind raced. Sheltering Alectoris was enormously risky. It was practically declaring herself an enemy of the subhuman empire's current ruler, giving Remington a perfect excuse for war. But the reward was equally enormous. A living prince with legitimate claim to the throne was a sword hanging over Remington's head. A card that could stir up chaos inside the empire, tie down their forces, and become a devastating trump card at the right moment. Surveya was ambitious. She understood this perfectly. "So you want sanctuary in the north?" she asked, cutting to the point. Alectoris nodded solemnly. "Yes, Your Highness. I hope to use your support to expose Remington's conspiracy and stop him from dragging the empire into war." Surveya made her decision without hesitation. She ordered Victor to take Alectoris and his companions to the Iris courtyard in the West Wing. Guarded, isolated, no visitors without her direct order. She also dispatched her best shadow guards across the Dragon Mountains to investigate what was happening inside the subhuman empire. After everyone left, she turned to me. "You're quite the advisor," she said, rubbing her temples. "I just started getting the North's mess under control, and you bring me a walking volcano that could trigger a war at any moment." I told her risk and reward always go together. A living heir with legitimate claim was worth more than 10 legions when it came to keeping Remington awake at night. She pushed a sealed letter across the table. Intelligence from Aurora, her friend and the church's holy maiden. A high-ranking church delegation had left the holy city, heading straight for Winter City, led by a light envoy from the Inquisition, accompanied by a cardinal's nephew, a notorious brat who loved picking fights with geniuses, especially ones who openly challenged the church. Like me, I told her to let them come. I'd recently developed some research interest in holy light magic. She gave up trying to warn me and went back to her paperwork. I headed to my alchemy workshop in the mansion's basement. Everything was laid out perfectly. Rune-etched glass vessels, rare materials, controlled flames. I pulled out the dragon bloodstone, stardust mithril sand, and a bottle of ancient life essence from the dragon ruins. Lilith watched with wide eyes as I began the fountain of youth synthesis. I ground the dragon bloodstone to fine powder, dissolved it in life essence, added the mithril sand, every step precise and flawless, following the ancient recipe exactly. The flames shifted from orange to blue. The liquid in the crucible boiled and spiraled into a beautiful vortex. According to the text, the finished potion should turn sky blue with a refreshing fragrance. The vortex settled. The color didn't turn blue. It went murky gray first, then after violent bubbling, stabilized into a clear, vibrant emerald green. The smell was rich, fresh herbs mixed with the sweet tang of dragon blood. Not what the recipe described. A failure, technically. But I wasn't surprised. I'd figured out the reason in seconds. Time. The recipe was 1,000 years old. Over that span, elemental tides shifted, environments changed, and the magical structure of plants evolved fundamentally. The ingredients shared names with their ancient counterparts, but were chemically different. Using modern materials to replicate an ancient formula and getting a different result was the only logical outcome. I poured the green liquid into a crystal vial and sealed it. Then I cast Revelation Divination, a prophecy spell that reads an object's faint connection to the future to reveal partial information about its properties. The silver runes wrapped around the vial, shifted, then dissolved. I opened my eyes. "I see." Lilith asked what the green potion could do. I told her the truth. It couldn't grant eternal youth, but it had healing power beyond anything that currently existed. As long as a person's soul hadn't been completely destroyed and their consciousness still existed, drinking it would regenerate their entire body within minutes, literally bringing someone back from the edge of death, regrowing flesh and bone from almost nothing. The catch? After the body fully healed, the drinker would temporarily shrink to a child's form, somewhere between 6 and 16 years old, depending on their age, magic reserves, and soul strength. Their power stayed the same, just in a kid's body. The effect lasted about 3 days. Lilith lost it. She started imagining me, the The cold, composed professor, as a 6-year-old boy drowning in an oversized black robe with huge glasses, and collapsed on the floor laughing like a pig. I told her my research notes were missing a page on half-elf physiological reactions under extreme terror, and she could be the test subject. She shot to her feet instantly, standing at attention, swearing she was only overwhelmed by the brilliance of my alchemy. I sealed the potion in a crystal vial and labeled it in Elvish. Fountain of Youth. Failed product number 1. It wasn't what the recipe promised, so by scholarly standards, it was a failure. An interesting failure, though. I decided to show it to Surveya. As my primary investor, she had the contractual right to see all results first. When I walked into the council room, the atmosphere was suffocating. Grayson was reporting the latest financial numbers. The table was covered in sheets of parchment, bleeding red ink. The industrial zone was a bottomless pit of expenses. Military re-equipping costs were astronomical. Government salaries, school scholarships, basic operations, every plan I'd drawn up was costing a fortune. The North was like a starving giant that couldn't be fed fast enough. Surveya looked exhausted. She knew my plans were right, but the weight of funding them all was crushing her. I walked in smiling, completely oblivious to, or honestly, not caring about, the mood. I said I had something interesting to show her. She looked up at me, then at her mountain of deficit reports, and ice filled her voice. She told me if I was there to brag about blowing up another warehouse or scheming against the church, she wasn't in the mood. That stung my pride. I'd come to share a genuine breakthrough, and this was the reception? I placed the crystal vial on top of her financial papers with a deliberate click. I told her that as my chief investor, she had the right to know about my results. Even if it was just a failed product, she took a deep breath, crossed her arms, and asked with barely contained sarcasm what this green stuff could do. Turn stone into bread? Double the iron output? Surveya was ready to dismiss me, but I kept talking. I told her the potion could heal any physical damage, severed limbs, shattered bones, even a pierced heart, in minutes, as long as the soul hadn't completely vanished. Bring someone back from near-total destruction. Grayson stopped breathing. Even as a financial bureaucrat, he understood what this meant on a battlefield. Soldiers who could be saved from almost any wound. A legion that barely dies. Surveya snapped to attention instantly, exhaustion gone, eyes like a predator spotting prey. She fired questions: cost, material sources, mass production potential. I killed the excitement in one sentence. The core ingredient was dragon bloodstone, found in a single ancient dragon ruin. There probably wasn't a second piece in the entire kingdom. No mass production. Impossible. The light in the room died. Grayson's face collapsed. Surveya's eyes went dull. A miracle drug that couldn't be reproduced was useless for her current crisis. It could save one person at the right moment, nothing more. Got it, she said flatly, turning back to her deficit reports. Anything else? That stung. I'd brought her a genuine breakthrough, and she treated it like junk. My competitive streak kicked in hard. I told her about the side effect. She assumed it would be something terrible: lifespan reduction, loss of sanity. I said no. The user's body temporarily reverts to childhood form, somewhere between 6 and 16 years old. Full power intact. Magic, physical strength, soul. Just in a small body. Lasts 3 days. The room went dead silent. Surveya's pen froze mid-signature, a growing ink blot spreading on the parchment. For the first time, her perfectly composed eyes showed pure, undisguised shock. Grayson's jaw hung open. Then Surveya stopped looking at me. She stared at the green vial on the table. Her fingers began tapping the desk, slowly at first, then faster, like a mind calculating something enormous. I could practically see the images flashing through her head. Old dukes on their deathbeds, ancient marshals kept alive by expensive potions and high-level healing priests, mega-wealthy merchants clinging to life with rotting bodies. All of them still clutching power, wealth, and influence. They had everything except time. Except a healthy body. If those people learned that something existed which could let them experience 3 days in a young, restored body, even temporarily, what would they pay? How much would they sacrifice? Surveya looked at me with barely contained excitement and said carefully, Lagaris, what if? Just consider this. The age regression is actually the real, primary effect. And the healing is just a minor side benefit? I blinked. What? Surveya leaned forward, eyes blazing, and asked me a question I hadn't considered. She painted a picture. Old dukes on their deathbeds, counting heartbeats, their bodies worth less than a single coin. Eternal youth was a fairy tale to them. But 3 real days? 3 days of feeling their heart pound strong again, tasting wine properly, walking without help, even fighting? That wasn't a fantasy. That was something they could touch. She asked me what that experience was worth. My brain caught up fast. I'm a genius. I just never thought about it from this angle. I'd been measuring the potion as a failed alchemical experiment. She was measuring it as a product for the most desperate, wealthiest people alive. She picked up the vial and rejected my label. It's not called Fountain of Youth Failed Product Number 1. That name is beneath it. She christened it Fleeting Youth. We would never advertise its healing properties. Officially, its only function was 3 days of restored youth. Starting auction price, 500,000 gold lion coins per dose. Grayson nearly choked. I told her she was insane. $500,000 for a 3-day dream? She fired back that I didn't understand how desperate people at the peak of power truly were. Dying dukes paid 100,000 just for a cardinal to extend their life by 1 miserable week. Billionaire merchants spent their entire fortunes chasing dragon blood for the fantasy of a dragon's lifespan. This potion was real. It would let them stand up, run, feel genuinely alive, not kept breathing by divine magic. 500,000 for a miracle no king could buy? She asked if I still thought it was expensive. I got it. I also suggested we could use this opportunity to build our own medical system and break free from church dependency. I started thinking about other potions I'd experimented with at the academy. A perfume that granted supernatural charisma for hours but attracted the same sex, muscle-boosting pills with a day of soreness afterward. Maybe those had commercial value too. I went back to my workshop satisfied. Grayson rushed off energized to rework the budgets. That night, Surveya took the vial and walked alone to the deepest courtyard of the mansion, where her grandfather Finra lay dying. She found him on the bed, skin like dried bark stretched over bones, barely breathing. The man who once tore apart ice bears with his hands was now a husk who could stay awake less than 2 hours a day. She sat beside him, held his cold, skeletal hand, and whispered his name. His cloudy eyes struggled open. It took him a long moment to recognize her. He tried to smile, but couldn't manage even that. She held the vial of fleeting youth in her other hand, knowing exactly who deserved the first dose. I found out later what happened that night. Surveya took the vial to her grandfather's bedside. Finra was barely alive, a dried-out shell who could stay awake less than 2 hours a day. She told him everything, the potion's effects, the side effect, and her plan to sell it for 500,000 gold coins a dose. She held nothing back, as if she were still the little girl who told her grandfather everything. The old wolf listened quietly. Then he laughed, a low, rattling sound from deep in his chest. He refused to drink it, not because he doubted it. He said he believed in my abilities and in her judgment. But he'd lived a full life. War, glory, power, wine. His book was on its last page. If he drank it and felt young again for 3 days, the crash back into his rotting body afterward would only make the end more unbearable. The potion didn't belong to him. It belonged to the future, to her, to the North. He told her to go do what needed to be done, to use it to buy the North a real future. That was what Finra blood was meant for. Surveya cried, but silently. She wiped her face, nodded, and walked out. Half an hour later, she called an emergency meeting. She placed the vial on the table and started giving orders. Grayson would create a marketing plan to make every upper-class person on the continent know about fleeting youth within 2 weeks. The message wasn't about healing or immortality. It was about experience. A once-in-a-lifetime luxury of restored youth. The auction would be hosted by the Golden Griffin family, held in Winter City. Every wealthy person who wanted the potion would have to come to the North personally, onto her territory. One advisor worried that people would call it a scam. Returning to youth sounded too impossible. Surveya agreed they needed proof. A living demonstration. A spokesperson. They needed someone famous, trusted by everyone, with no political ties, and visibly dying. So the before and after would be undeniable. Grayson suggested wealthy merchants and retired generals, but Surveya rejected each one for being too commercially motivated or politically connected. Then she said a name, Lady Margaret. The room went silent. Margaret was the widow of the kingdom's richest merchant. She'd donated most of her fortune to create the kingdom's largest charity, saving countless orphans and refugees over decades. Her public trust rivaled the king's. Everyone knew she was nearly 80, crippled by illness, a candle in the wind. The perfect spokesperson. Grayson pointed out that Margaret despised aristocratic luxury and speculation. Showing up with a $500,000 coin potion would get them thrown out. Surveya smiled. So we don't just bring the potion. She turned to a servant and told them to go find me. She figured, correctly, that I'd still be in the basement doing alchemy. A servant dragged me out of my workshop where I was planning my next experiment. Surveya reminded me of something I'd written ages ago, a document I'd half-jokingly called Welfare and Basic Medical Security System Construction Draft. I dismissed it as the ramblings of a naive dreamer. She told me to finish it by morning and make at least the first phase actually workable. She explained her plan. We weren't going to beg Lady Margaret to endorse a luxury product. We were going to offer her something real, a chance to fulfill her lifelong dream of helping the poor. Fleeting youth was the spark. My welfare plan was the true gift. I wanted to refuse. This wasn't my field. But her words stirred something I'd buried deep. That draft wasn't just idle theory. It came from memories I didn't like revisiting. I sighed and took it on. Some of the potions I'd been planning to sell commercially could fit into the medical framework anyway. I demanded a quiet room, unlimited coffee, and 0 interruptions. I worked through the entire night. By morning, I looked like a ghost with dark circles deep enough to store coins in. But I had a massive stack of documents. A complete, actionable plan. We took a plane carriage to Lady Margaret's charity estate outside the city. No luxury, just clean schoolhouses, workshops, and orphanages. The smell of food and children's laughter instead of perfume. Margaret was sitting in a sunlit room, knitting. Ancient and frail, but her eyes were startlingly clear. She greeted Surveya by her street nickname, the Butcher of Winter City, with a teasing smile and no malice. She'd read my published papers and the church's attacks against them, and said mine were more interesting. I pushed my glasses up and said nothing. I was used to hostility, not genuine compliments. Margaret cut straight through pleasantries. She said the 2 busiest people in the north didn't come for tea, so what did we actually want? Surveya placed the fleeting youth vial on the table and explained everything. The healing, the age regression, the 3-day duration. I added, in my usual flat tone, that it was technically a failed product since I'd been aiming for immortality. Margaret studied the vial, her smile fading. She'd seen miracles and lies in her 70-plus years. She murmured, bringing the dead back to life, restoring flesh to bone, then becoming young again. Then her gaze sharpened. She said bluntly that this potion would drive every noble in the kingdom insane, and asked what we meant by bringing it to her. That was exactly the opening Surveya wanted. She gave me the signal. I reluctantly pulled the massive stack of papers from my coat, still smelling of ink and coffee, and dropped it on the table with a thud. It was thicker than a dictionary. Margaret frowned. What is this? A promise, Surveya said, looking her straight in the eyes. And the real gift we came to give you today. Margaret picked up the first page of my document, Northern Comprehensive Welfare and Basic Medical Security System Construction Draft. Her hands started shaking as she read. The plan laid out a 3-tier medical network covering every commoner in the north. Tier 1. Basic health stations in every town, staffed by trained nurses and pharmacy apprentices, handling common illness and injuries using my cheap reformulated healing potions and antibacterial ointments. 1/10 the market cost. Tier 2. Public hospitals in major cities with real doctors and Magitech medical equipment for complex diseases and surgery. Tier 3. A central medical academy in Winter City for research, training, and developing new treatments in partnership with the industrial zone. The plan even included a medical insurance system where commoners paid a tiny annual fee and got most treatment costs covered. Margaret had spent decades in charity work, burning through her fortune just to feed some orphans and shelter some refugees. What she was reading went beyond anything she'd ever dared dream. She looked up sharply and asked Surveya if she had any idea how much this would cost. An absolute bottomless pit. Surveya pointed at the fleeting youth vial. She explained the auction plan, 1 bottle, starting at 500,000 gold coins, hosted in Winter City. Every coin from the sale would fund the first phase of this welfare plan. Margaret forced herself to stay skeptical. She'd seen too many politicians draw pretty pictures. She demanded to know what guarantee existed that the money wouldn't just disappear into Surveya's pockets. Surveya pointed to facts. The Enlightenment school, nobles resisted, the church blocked it, commoners didn't trust it. She introduced scholarships, and now over 70% of eligible children were enrolled. She'd promised education and delivered. Now she was promising healthcare. Margaret went quiet for a long time, weighing everything. Her entire reputation was built on staying independent from politics. Standing with Surveya meant tying herself to a young ruler's fate. If Surveya succeeded, it would be a new era. If she failed, or this was a scam, Margaret's lifelong honor would be destroyed. I yawned. The draft was done, my job was finished. The political theater wasn't my department. Finally, Margaret spoke. She said she was old and sick, with maybe 5 years left. If she agreed to be the spokesperson and prove fleeting youth's effects with her own body, she had one condition. At least 300,000 gold coins from the auction had to go into a dedicated Northern People's Welfare Foundation, supervised by her and people she personally chose. And she wanted the first public hospital to break ground within 6 months. It was an extreme demand, essentially sharing oversight of public finances. No ruler would normally agree. Surveya didn't hesitate for even 1 second. Deal? Margaret stared at her, stunned. She'd prepared arguments for pushback that never came. Looking into Surveya's clear, steady eyes, the old woman finally understood. This princess meant every word. Margaret smiled, a real warm smile. Well then, these old bones will join you young people for one more act of madness. The day after Margaret agreed, rumors started spreading through Winter City. Whispers about a miracle drug that could restore youth. Baroque from the Commerce Guild mocked it as a scam by a desperate princess. But when the official invitations went out naming Lady Margaret as the witness, everyone went quiet. The woman who never endorsed anything political or commercial was standing behind this. The entire upper class was stunned. Surveya dragged me out of my workshop. I hadn't slept, my hair was a disaster, and I smelled like coffee and chemicals. She said I had to be there in case anyone asked technical questions she couldn't answer. Fair enough. The central square was packed. A massive Magitech projection array had been set up to broadcast everything across the city in real time. I thought it was overkill. Surveya told me I was underestimating how badly the old and powerful craved youth. The demonstration began simply. Margaret shuffled to the center of the square, supported by a maid. She looked exactly like what she was, a woman at death's door. The projection showed every wrinkle, every labored step, in crystal clarity. Reporters shouted questions, accusing Surveya of coercing her or buying her off. Margaret raised her hand for silence. She spoke clearly. She'd spent her life helping forgotten people, but her time was running out. When the princess offered a chance to buy more time, she had no reason to refuse. Surveya walked out carrying the vial of fleeting youth on a tray. Margaret took it, pulled the stopper without hesitation, and drank it all. 1 second. 2. 5. Nothing happened. The crowd started murmuring, told you it was fake. Then it began. On the massive projection, everyone watched Margaret's white hair turn jet black from the roots, spreading like ink through water in seconds. Her wrinkles smoothed away as if an invisible hand were ironing them flat. Her cloudy eyes became bright and clear like polished gems. Her hunched spine straightened, her thin limbs filled out with healthy muscle. In less than a minute, a vibrant young girl stood where a dying old woman had been. Oversized robes hung comically on her smaller frame, but that face, youthful, alive, yet carrying eyes that had seen 7 decades of the world, left every single person in the square frozen silent. Up on a tower, Alectoris and Alice watched in disguise. Alice couldn't believe it wasn't an illusion. The magical readings showed genuine biological reconstruction. Alectoris quietly said I had a gift for creating things beyond imagination. In another corner of the square, several men in plain clothes with cold auras were furious. Church agents. They hissed that this was blasphemy. Extending life and granting youth was supposed to be God's exclusive power. One of them pointed out the real threat. Every year, dying nobles donated fortunes to the church for a few extra months of life. If this potion spread, their entire life extension business would become a joke. After the silence came the eruption. The entire square went mad. screaming about miracles, real youth restoration, the impossible made real. But the young again Margaret didn't waste a second enjoying her new body. She immediately started barking orders at her staff in a voice that didn't match her teenage appearance. Start construction on the orphanage expansion today, review the winter food supply lists, and finish the third-generation prosthetic limb prototypes within 3 days. The projection array broadcast all of this across the city. People realized the potion wasn't a toy for pleasure. It was a tool that let great souls do more with their limited time. Surveya took the stage at the perfect moment. She announced that due to the extreme rarity of materials and difficulty of production, only 5 vials of Fleeting Youth would be auctioned in Winter City in 2 weeks. Only 5. That number set fire to every greedy heart in the audience. When skeptics questioned whether there were hidden dangers, a golden griffin descended from the sky, carrying a messenger with a personal letter from Phoenix de Auguste. He vouched for my academic integrity and character, stated his family's full backing, and announced they'd send a representative to bid. The golden griffin's seal crushed the last doubts. The news spread across the continent like wildfire. In mansions and castles everywhere, dying nobles and aging generals scrambled to liquidate everything they owned. One bedridden old general ordered his staff to sell every estate and convert every coin. He wanted to wear his armor one more time. Winter City transformed overnight from a remote northern outpost into the center of the world's wealth and desire. But the uninvited guests came quickly. 5 days after the announcement, the church's investigation team arrived. 12 Holy Temple Knights escorting a delegation led by Helena, a newly promoted rank 5 Holy Knight known for being devout and rigid. Their presence immediately chilled the city. Potential buyers hesitated. Spending a fortune on the potion only to be labeled a heretic accomplice wasn't appealing. The night before the auction, I was alone in the venue's backstage, checking the defensive arrays I'd personally installed. Warning rune matrices, spatial distortion traps, anti-divination barriers, all functioning properly. Basic stuff, but sufficient. I heard footsteps in the shadows. I assumed it was Lilith slacking off and threatened to dock her pay. Professor. It's not her. A nervous young man's voice. I turned around. A guy in his early 20s wearing a plain priest's robe stood there, face flushed, holding a worn, dog-eared copy of my book, 11 Hypotheses on the External Manifestations of Ether and Their Applications. Professor Lagaris. I'm your biggest fan. His eyes were shining like he'd met a god. My name is Leo. I've read 11 Hypotheses at least 30 times. Your nonlinear mana-tide fluctuation theory completely revolutionized my understanding of energy-shaping magic. I stared at him. A church member. Who was my fan? What was happening? A fanboy from the enemy camp. That was new. Leo didn't even notice my surprise. He ranted about how the church elders were idiots who couldn't understand my work, how they clung to 1,000-year-old dogma and called everything beyond their comprehension blasphemy. He said the Light Envoy investigation team was sent specifically to cause me trouble. Helena was a good person, but too rigid. The bishops had convinced her I was running evil human experiments. Then he dropped his real offer. His father was one of the church's cardinal bishops. He'd act as my informant, feeding me the investigation team's internal movements. I scanned his mind with a high-level detection spell. He was genuine. I said yes. Any piece on the board has value in an information war. I asked about Helena. Leo said she was incredibly difficult, incorruptible, immovable, with near-fanatical devotion to her god. And she wielded Holy Judgment Blade, a sword technique designed specifically for executing heretics, capable of burning souls with holy light. A rank 5 Holy Knight. Leo told me to be careful. The next morning, I went to check on the Enlightenment School. On the way, I turned a corner and walked straight into Helena's squad. 12 Temple Knights in silver-white armor with blazing cross insignias. Helena stood at the front, helmetless. Flame-red hair in a high ponytail, emerald eyes, flawless face carved from ice. I probed her with a thread of magic. Confirmed rank 5 Holy Knight, exactly as Leo described. She called my name like a verdict. She said she was here under church orders to investigate my crimes, playing with life, faking miracles, violating divine authority. Her knights stepped forward, holy energy pressing down on the street like a weight. Civilians scattered. I felt nothing. Same script as always. I waited to see if she had anything original. She did. 5 years ago in the capital, you killed a bishop with your own hands. His name was Valerius. He was my father. The street went silent. I remembered him instantly. Valerius, a two-faced hypocrite who tried to use my head as a stepping stone during the period when the church had me on their most wanted list. He came after me. I killed him instead. His last words were a curse damning me to the abyss. And now his daughter stood before me, burning with hatred and grief. A rank 5 holy knight with a personal vendetta. I should have been cautious. Instead, the worst part of my personality, the one suppressed by years of quiet research, surged to the surface. I looked at this beautiful, fury-filled knight and smiled my most obnoxious smile. Oh, so you're that guy's daughter, right? I did kill your father for certain unavoidable reasons, and you've been holding a grudge all this time? How should I put this? I stepped forward, spread my arms theatrically like an actor taking a bow, and announced in a loud, almost operatic voice, "You lost your father, but you still have me. I could absolutely be your life's guide and give you the same fatherly care." Helena's brain short-circuited. Her face flushed crimson. Pure humiliation. She snapped. Golden holy light exploded from her body. Her sword screamed out of its sheath, wreathed in purifying flame. Leo appeared from nowhere and grabbed her arm with both hands, face white with panic. He shouted that this was Winter City. They represented the church, and attacking the princess's chief advisor on a public street without investigation would cause a diplomatic disaster. His words barely reached her. She stared at me, at my unchanged, infuriating smile, chest heaving with rage. She sheathed her sword. The holy light faded. "We're leaving." She turned and walked away, her back radiating killing intent. In the instant she turned, I flicked a tiny listening rune from my fingertip. It sailed in an invisible arc and attached itself perfectly to the metal clasp at the back of her neck armor. After planting the listening rune on Helena, I was in a good mood. I decided to visit the Enlightenment School to check on my long-term investment. The school was set up in a seized noble estate. Before I even entered the yard, I could hear children reading aloud. I crept to a classroom window and looked in. A middle-aged man, clearly self-taught, was enthusiastically teaching basic arithmetic on a blackboard. The kids sat ramrod straight, staring at him like hungry wolves afraid to miss a single number. On the back wall, giant red letters read, "Top 100 in final exams win 5 gold lion coins. Money drives motivation better than any sermon." These children, fueled by pure desire, were studying harder than the pampered noble kids in the capital's elite academies. My design was working perfectly. The bell rang, and the kids exploded out of the classroom. In the courtyard, I spotted Alice entertaining a crowd of children with a controlled fire spell, a little flame rabbit hopping around them. Alec Taurus crouched nearby watching with genuine wonder, no trace of princely dignity, just pure fascination with ordinary life. He noticed me first. He walked over with barely contained admiration and said he'd just learned I'd left my prestigious position at St. Arcadia to come build a school for commoner children in this poor, frozen place. He called me a living saint of noble character. I wanted to correct him. I came to save Surveya, and the school was purely to cultivate cheap future workers and technicians. But that explanation somehow sounded worse. His voice carried. The children heard everything. Their eyes changed from simple respect to fanatical gratitude. A skinny little girl burst into tears, saying her father told her St. Arcadia was a place even nobles dreamed of attending. A freckled boy choked up, saying he couldn't believe someone from such a place came to help people like them. Soon they were all crying and calling me a good person whose kindness they could never repay. I froze completely. My whole body felt like it was crawling with ants. I can dissect the most terrifying magical creatures without blinking. I can calmly calculate spells that could level cities. But dealing with sincere, overwhelming emotional gratitude? That's my worst nightmare. I pushed my glasses up with a stiff hand and managed to squeeze out, "I have an urgent alchemy experiment to attend to." Then I practically fled. The children watched my retreating back with worshipful eyes. Alec Taurus watched me go and sighed to Alice. "See? He does incredible good deeds, but never takes credit. He won't even accept thanks. What a pure soul." Alice crossed her arms and muttered, "Pure my foot." He just had a social anxiety attack and ran away from the awkwardness. Later, Alectoris and Alice crossed paths with Helena's squad on the street. When Alice and Helena passed each other, both stopped for a split second. Their eyes met. No words, no magic, but the temperature around them seemed to drop several degrees. A deep, instinctive mutual revulsion, as if something in their very souls rejected each other on sight. They both looked away quickly, as if even glancing at the other was painful. Alectoris asked Alice what was wrong. She said coldly, "Nothing. Just didn't like the look of her." Helena, on her end, was equally disturbed by the inexplicable hatred she'd felt. She blamed it on the girl having the same detestable black hair as me. My confrontation with Helena on the street didn't scare anyone away. It had the opposite effect. Word spread in hours that the church's light envoy nearly drew her sword on me, and I didn't flinch. Every potential buyer took it as proof. If the church was this desperate, the potion must be real and must be cutting into their life extension racket. The last doubts evaporated. Crates of gold coins flooded into the city. Meanwhile, I sat in my workshop with my eyes closed, listening through the rune I'd planted on Helena. I heard her struggling. She'd visited the city that day and seen the Enlightenment School, children with hungry eyes devouring knowledge. She'd heard about Surveya's tax reforms that freed commoners from crushing burdens. None of it matched her image of me as a murderous blasphemer. She couldn't find a legitimate reason to move against me, but her hatred over her father still burned. She was completely torn. I found her internal conflict more entertaining than a perfect alchemical reaction. The auction night arrived. The hall was magnificent. Magitech lights blazing, velvet-covered chairs, representatives from across the continent sitting with greedy eyes behind aristocratic masks. Surveya walked onto the stage in a silver-white gown, hair swept up, silver-gray eyes cutting through the room. No speeches. Rules are simple. Highest bid wins. First vial of fleeting youth. Starting price, 500,000 gold lion coins. The bidding erupted instantly. 550, 600, 700, 75. Numbers climbing like a runaway beast. After over a dozen rounds, the first bottle sold for 800,000 to an envoy representing an old marshal from the Valeria Empire. Second bottle, 780,000. Third, 820,000. By the time the fifth bottle fell at 750,000, the total stood at 4,850,000 gold lion coins. Grayson was shaking so hard he could barely breathe. Nearly 5 million. Enough to make the richest provinces jealous. Everyone thought it was over. Then Surveya walked back onto the stage. "What you just saw," she said with a calm smile, "was only the appetizer." Servants carried out a larger case. They opened it. At least 20 more vials of fleeting youth, glowing emerald green. The room lost its mind. People shouted about fraud. We'd said only 5 existed. Surveya raised her hand, and silence fell. The real feast begins now. I call it the Northern Development Friendship Initiative. Any family or faction willing to sign long-term investment agreements for Northern railways, mines, industrial construction, or medical infrastructure would receive a free vial of fleeting youth plus priority purchasing rights for all future alchemical products. The room exploded again, but this time with frantic excitement. Pre-drafted contracts were distributed instantly, covering or transport, infrastructure, healthcare investment, and talent recruitment. Representatives scrambled to contact their masters through communication devices. In mansions across the continent, dying nobles did the math in seconds. Invest 800,000 in a railway, get a free potion that just sold for 800,000, plus future dividends from the railway itself. It was essentially free money with a miracle drug as a bonus. The bidding war transformed into a signing frenzy. The same people who'd been fighting over 5 bottles were now racing to lock in investment deals for 20 more. The contracts poured in like a flood. Northern Railway Investment, Winter City Mining Development, Magitech Talent Recruitment. Grayson floated over to Surveya, clutching the final tally like a newborn baby, voice trembling. Total first phase investment, 32,300,000 gold lion coins. 32 million. Enough to pave the entire city in gold. Surveya's composure cracked. Genuine, unrestrained joy broke through for the first time. She announced a banquet at the Duke's mansion. Everyone invited. Nobody leaves sober. I tried to escape to my lab. Surveya appeared behind me, grabbed my wrist, and dragged me to the seat next to hers. You're the biggest contributor tonight. You're not going anywhere. The feast was chaotic and alive. Victor and Grayson, red-eyed veterans who'd watched the North decay for decades, raised their glasses in disbelief at what they'd witnessed. Alec Torres sat taking it all in with genuine wonder. Alice abandoned all pretense of manners and hauled an entire roasted beast leg onto her plate, eating with oil dripping down her chin. Lilith crammed food into her cheeks like a hamster, determined to eat her body weight before the night ended. Surveya dropped her political mask completely. She started with elegant sips and ended up drinking straight from the bottle. All the pressure, the capital schemes, the train assassination, the northern reforms, the financial nightmares, she poured it all out with the wine. Her silver eyes went hazy, her pale cheeks flushed pink, and she transformed into something dangerously radiant. Then she came for me. I was quietly drinking fruit juice disguised as wine. She caught me. I explained that alcohol impairs cognitive precision, and I had 12 experiments scheduled tomorrow. She didn't care. She grabbed both my wrists with one hand, rank 5 night strength versus a theoretical mage's body, and shoved a wine bottle into my mouth. I couldn't break free. The entire room watched their genius advisor get force-fed alcohol like medicine. Today I'm in charge, she declared, hands on hips. Drink, Alice cheered from the sidelines. Pour more? Make him pay for always acting superior. Her joy was short-lived. A few more drinks in, Surveya's vision blurred. She spotted Alice's black hair across the room and apparently decided I'd used a clone spell to avoid drinking. She grabbed a fresh bottle, lunged at Alice, locked her in a headlock, and started pouring. Alice screamed that she wasn't me. Alec Torres rushed to help, grabbed Surveya's arm, and pulled with all his rank 4 Dragon Knight strength. She didn't budge, not even a little. He felt like he was trying to move a mountain. Alice got thoroughly drowned in wine before collapsing and being dragged to a couch. Meanwhile, the alcohol had unlocked something in me. My usual ironclad rationality crumbled, and my competitive, obnoxious side came roaring out. I told Surveya her brute force approach proved exactly why knights were inferior to mages. Mages were elegant. Mages drove civilization forward. A rank 7 spell could permanently reshape terrain. Could knights do that? She slammed the table. A rank 7 knight can solo charge through an entire army. Can your mages do that? I can calculate the trajectories of stars, I said smugly. I can chug this entire bottle in one go, she said, and immediately tilted a full bottle of moonlight wine straight down her throat. I stared at her. Wait, how were those two things even comparable? Surveya dared me to chug a whole bottle like she just did. I grabbed one and tried. Wine went down the wrong pipe. I choked violently, and she laughed so hard she nearly fell over. That was it. My competitive side took over completely. Rationality was gone. What followed was the most undignified argument of my life. We stood nose to nose screaming about whether mages or knights were superior. Mages can turn invisible. Knights can charge armies. Mages control elements. Knights ignore elements. It devolved into just shouting, mages are better, knights are better, back and forth like children. Everyone in the room was frozen. Victor's jaw dropped. Grayson looked like he was hallucinating. My student Aaron watched his world crumble in real time. Lilith quietly pulled out a memory crystal and started recording, already calculating what the blackmail footage was worth. Alice, half dead on the couch from being force-fed wine earlier, lifted her head and mumbled, Lagaris, you can't beat her in arm wrestling. She can't beat you in brains. Call it even. Surveya and I both turned to glare at her simultaneously. Alec Torres lunged to cover her mouth, apologizing frantically. We ignored him and went right back to arguing, louder than before. The drinking continued between insults. Eventually, the alcohol won. My voice started slurring. You, her eyelids drooped. I. We both collapsed face first onto the table at almost the exact same instant. Unconscious, the hall fell silent. Victor exhaled like he'd survived a battle. He was about to have servants carry us to our rooms when a shadow behind Surveya's chair began moving on its own, darker than any natural darkness, rising into a three-dimensional shape. A woman stepped out of the shadow, black leather armor, purple hair draped casually over her shoulders, a lazy, dangerous elegance. Nobody had sensed her at all. Victor's hand slammed to his sword. Alec Torres shielded Alice. She held one finger to her lips. Shoo. All sound in the room vanished. First time meeting everyone. I'm Esmeralda, captain of the princess's shadow guard. She'd been there the entire time, watching everything, hearing everything. She scooped up the unconscious Surveya with one arm, then sent a shadow tendril from the floor to wrap around me and drag me behind her. On her way out, she spotted Lilith hiding the recording crystal. She appeared behind Lilith in a blink and plucked the crystal from her hands. You can't be filming things like this. If the princess finds out, well, use your imagination. Lilith swore she saw nothing and knew nothing. Esmeralda carried Surveya to her bedroom, tucked her in properly, then looked at me being dragged by a shadow tentacle. She grinned with obvious mischief. I'm too kind-hearted to let someone sleep on the floor. She tossed me onto the bed, right next to Surveya. She admired her work, smiled wider, and whispered, "Tomorrow morning is going to be very interesting." Then she melted into the wall's shadow and disappeared. I woke up with a headache that felt like my skull was splitting open. The ceiling above me was unfamiliar, crystal chandeliers, gilded paintings, elaborate carvings. Not my lab, not my room. I sat up and felt movement beside me. Surveya. She was lying on her side, silver-white hair spread across the pillow, strands draped over my arm. One of her hands was resting on my waist. She was pressed against me, completely unguarded. My brain stopped working. 3 seconds to go from confusion to shock to pure horror. What happened last night? Fragments came back. Wine. Lots of wine. Surveya forcing a bottle down my throat. Then, we argued. About mages versus knights? I forced myself to think logically. Step 1. Check clothes. My black research robe was still on, wrinkled like a dried rag, but every button in place. Necktie crooked but not torn. I looked at Surveya. Her riding jacket was off. Her white shirt was messy, but all buttons intact. I exhaled. It felt like surviving a forbidden class spell, but the embarrassment hit immediately. If anyone found us like this, I would experience social death on a catastrophic scale. I had to escape. Now, I moved with extreme care. Slowly lifted her hand off my waist, inched toward the edge of the bed millimeter by millimeter. She turned over in her sleep, and I froze solid, not breathing, staring at her. She didn't wake. I kept going. I crawled off the bed like a thief, glasses hanging sideways off my nose. Didn't stop to fix them. My feet hit the floor. I glanced back at her one last time. Then I sprinted to the door, opened it, launched myself through, and slammed it shut. The entire escape radiated panic and zero dignity. What I didn't know was that Surveya had been awake the whole time. Her rank 5 night constitution meant she'd recovered from the alcohol long before me. But she had no idea how to handle the situation either, so she pretended to sleep while I fumbled my way out. After I fled, she sat up, ears red, and called for Esmeralda through gritted teeth. The shadow guard captain materialized from the wall, grinning. Surveya demanded to know what happened and why I was in her bed. Esmeralda, with perfect timing, drawled that, "Of course, you two did what drunk people do." Surveya nearly had a heart attack. Her face went crimson, her imagination spiraling out of control. Esmeralda let her panic for a few seconds before patting her back and admitting she was joking. We'd just argued, passed out, and she dumped us both on the bed fully clothed. Nothing happened. Surveya was furious and relieved, and, though she'd never admit it, the tiniest bit disappointed. An hour later she was back in her study, composure restored, handling paperwork. A servant informed her that Helena, the church's light envoy, had requested a meeting that afternoon. Surveyor agreed. 2 o'clock, reception hall. She sat looking out the window at the snow, and her mind drifted back to the sound of me scrambling out of her room in a panic. The normally unshakable genius mage, stumbling around like a kid caught doing something wrong. She couldn't help smiling. Then she shook her head and went back to work. But that tiny, unexplainable feeling of disappointment never quite went away. That afternoon, Surveya met Helena in the reception hall. I wasn't there, but I heard about it later. Before the meeting, Surveya ordered the Northern Gazette to prepare a feature article, Magitech, God's gift for improving lives. She wanted the public firmly on her side before Helena walked through the door. Helena arrived in full silver-white armor, sword at her hip, and refused to sit. She delivered the church's formal protest. Fleeting youth was theft of divine authority, blatant blasphemy. The church demanded the North stop all production and sales immediately and hand me over for investigation. Surveya listened politely, then refused everything. Helena asked if Surveya was really protecting a blasphemer. Surveya corrected her. She was protecting a scholar who worked for the people. Helena called it a joke, saying the potion only helped greedy nobles live longer. Surveya reframed it. The potion let heroes and sages extend their service to the world. She asked if that wasn't practicing God's mercy. Then Surveya went deeper, quoting church scripture. If God loves humanity, then any technology that reduces suffering and helps the good live longer should be celebrated, not condemned. Refusing to save people because of rigid dogma, that was the real betrayal of divine will. Helena struggled to respond. She remembered the children at the Enlightenment school, the gratitude on common people's faces. Those things were real. But she fell back on what she knew for certain. He killed my father. That's a fact. Surveya said she understood the pain, but some truths weren't as simple as they appeared. Helena would need to find those answers herself. Helena said she wouldn't give up her investigation. Surveya told her to go ahead, but reminded her that the North wasn't church territory, and she wasn't the church's servant. As Helena turned to leave, Surveya dropped one more piece. She was close friends with Holy Maiden Aurora, and they regularly discussed faith and public welfare. Aurora believed any technology that improved people's lives should be considered a gift from God. Helena's expression shifted. Aurora was the church's rising star, a future candidate for pope. Her opinion carried enormous weight. Helena left, shaken but not broken. Back at her quarters, she went through the mountain of files her people had gathered on me. Background, career, academic achievements, rumors. She flipped through faster and faster until her hand stopped on something. An old academy portrait from when I first enrolled at St. Arcadia. In every later image, I wore glasses. But in this earliest picture, I was wearing a black eye patch over my left eye. I threw myself into work to forget the mortifying morning. The hangover was splitting my skull, but embarrassment was worse medicine. Vest Medical's first pilot pharmacy had been built in Winter City's poorest district in just days. The building was clean and white, almost sacred looking against the grimy neighborhood. Inside, neat shelves held rows of uniformly labeled potion bottles, all produced by my automated alchemical assembly line. What would normally require dozens of trained alchemists, I'd replaced with 10 workers operating Magitech machinery. Faster, cheaper, almost zero failure rate. Grayson met me buzzing with excitement. The basic recovery potion was priced at 1 silver deer coin, 1/3 of market price, barely above cost. I told him profit didn't matter. I wanted every price-gouging alchemist shop and black market medicine dealer in the North to go bankrupt. Grayson looked startled by my intensity, probably wondering what grudge I held against potion sellers. Surveya had pushed the first welfare bill through the Northern Council. Registered poor families would receive 3 free medical vouchers per month, redeemable exclusively at Vest Medical. Combined with the Fleeting Youth Creators' own affordable medicine branding, the pharmacy had lines stretching 2 blocks before opening. The luxury counter was doing even better. My special products, experimental side projects I'd never intended to commercialize, were flying off shelves. The irresistible perfume that boosted charisma but might attract the same sex. The Inspiration Burst potion with a tiny chance of making you speak in third person and believe you're the chosen one. The Sweet Dreams elixir with dreams so vivid you might not distinguish them from reality afterward. Rich young nobles and socialites didn't care about side effects. Some were probably buying specifically for them. Luxury items funding essential medicine. Rich subsidizing poor. The model worked. That night, I was in my new private lab on the pharmacy's top floor, adjusting the last anti-detection rune. Surveillance crystals covered every corner of the building. Then I spotted 2 figures sneaking down the corridor toward the cold storage room where Fleeting Youth was kept. One was a flamboyant man carrying a lute, a traveling bard type. The other was a small boy, maybe 10 years old. The bard pulled out something like a tuning fork and struck it. An invisible sound wave disrupted my first layer of warning runes. Sonic magic. A rare, difficult school. Interesting. I didn't trigger the alarm. Instead, I watched him work through my defenses one by one. Impressive technique. I called Lilith on the communicator and told her we had 2 mice. Catch them alive. I wanted to know where they got the nerve to break in here. I sealed the entire floor with an invisible barrier. A jar to catch the flies. The bard, Iowan, as I'd learned, sweated through every trap, each one deadlier than any treasure vault he'd ever cracked. He finally popped the last rune lock and pushed open the heavy metal door, practically tasting his payday. Behind the door, instead of shelves of priceless potions, he found a brightly lit lab. And me, sitting in a chair sipping tea. "Welcome," I said with a smile. "How did you find my security system?" His grin froze. Lilith dropped from the ceiling shadow, chopped the back of his neck, and had him chained up in under 3 seconds. "Clean work." The little boy behind the bard collapsed to the ground, shaking with fear. Lilith stood on the tied-up Iowan's back, grinning at me for approval. I ignored her and walked past the bard straight to the kid. I crouched down to his eye level. "Why did you come to steal?" He was trembling, teeth chattering. I told him if he didn't talk, I'd hand him to the city guards, and their methods for dealing with thieves were worse than anything I could think of. He didn't cry. He just looked at me with empty eyes and started talking in a flat, dead voice, like he was telling someone else's story. His father went into a noble's forest last winter to chop firewood because it was freezing. He caught a rabbit while he was there. Got caught. The noble called him a thief. Under the old northern law, poaching on noble land was a hanging offense. His mother begged on her knees all day. Didn't matter. They hanged his father anyway. After that, his mother got sick. She'd been coughing blood ever since. His little sister was born blind, couldn't do anything, just lay in bed. He heard that fleeting youth was worth a fortune. He figured if he stole one bottle and sold it, he could buy medicine for his mother. I ran a mental probe the entire time. No lies, no exaggeration, no emotional manipulation. Just numb, pure truth. The kid didn't even understand what fleeting youth was. He just knew it was expensive, naive, and heartbreaking. I looked at Iowan. The bard's joking mask was gone. He sighed and admitted it. He'd heard the boy's story in a tavern a few days ago. A kid alone, supporting a sick mother and blind sister, hauling sacks at the docks until his bones nearly broke. Iowan got drunk, felt sorry for him, and offered to help pull off a big job. Didn't expect to hit a wall like me. My mind went somewhere else. The boy's father died for a rabbit. Under old northern law, trespassing on noble land and poaching was indeed punishable by death. But that rabbit meant nothing to a noble, not even worth a side dish. To a serf in winter, it was the difference between living and dying. My chest felt tight. I remembered being 11. My mother had just died. I was wandering the kingdom alone, starving. I broke into a wealthy house looking for food. The panicked owner shot me in the shoulder. I still remember that despair. When you're cornered, you don't think about right or wrong. You just need to survive. I got out through luck and talent. This kid had neither. I walked to the shelf, grabbed a bottle of disease-clearing compound, and pulled a few gold lion coins from my pocket. I shoved them into the boy's hands. "Get out." He stared at me, frozen. I said, "Get out. Don't let me see you again." He clutched the medicine and coins, tears finally falling. He stammered a thank you and stumbled away down the corridor. I remembered something. That house owner who shot me. When he realized I was just a ragged child, he didn't turn me in. He called a doctor, fed me, and let me go. Lilith looked confused. I didn't explain. Iowan tried his luck, grinning hopefully. "So I can leave too, right? I'm a good citizen. I even helped the kid. He can go." "You can't." His smile died. I told him I'd noticed his ears, half-elf, skilled in sonic magic, a rare specialty. That kind of talent wasn't walking out my door. He sputtered about kidnapping innocent civilians. I told Lilith to lock him up. I'd deal with him tomorrow. She planted her foot on his back, beaming. "Don't worry, boss. I'll watch him like a hawk." Iowan begged me to reconsider. He could sing, tell stories, work as a bodyguard. I was already gone. I woke up with a stiff neck on the cold metal desk. Bad dreams again. The boy from yesterday had dredged up old memories from my childhood. The lab was a mess. I'd blown up another crucible during the night trying to work through my frustration. Lilith bounced in with a stimulant drink and reported that the bard Iowan was locked in the anti-magic cell downstairs, completely neutralized. She questioned why I'd let the boy go when he'd tried to steal something worth a city block. I shut her down with a look. She didn't need an explanation for my decisions. I told her to keep Iowan alive and contained. His sonic magic could be useful. Then I sat at my desk trying to clear my head. That's when I noticed the Black Prophecy book at the corner of my desk. The timing was right for a refresh. I opened it. New golden text had appeared. Evil roots have been planted deep in winter's frozen soil. Corrupted believers chant in the shadows. If not cut away, within 3 months, the city will cease to be a city. City will cease to be a city. A hidden cult inside Winter City? Corrupted believers. Was this referring to remnants of the purged nobles? The church investigation team? Something else entirely? Not the church. They were aggressive, but their goal was maintaining divine authority, not destroying a northern capital. That wouldn't benefit them. Then who? 3 months. Not much time. While I was analyzing the prophecy, the communication crystal on my desk flared with urgent pulses, maximum priority. Surveya's image appeared. She was in military gear, standing in the strategic command room with the northern map behind her. Her face was grim, all composure gone. Come to the council hall. Now, she told me the Shadow Guards had detected massive troop movements on the subhuman empire's border. Regent Remington was mobilizing at an unprecedented scale. The 2nd, Storm, Legion, and 5th, Bedrock, Legion were converging near the Black Forest defensive line north of the Dragon Mountains. Over 40,000 troops, far beyond any training exercise. This isn't a drill, she said, voice like ice. This is a war mobilization. War? At the worst possible time. Our power structure wasn't fully established. The industrial zone had barely started. Everything we'd built was still fragile. Then lightning struck in my mind. I looked down at the prophecy book. Evil roots inside the city. War mobilization outside. Both hitting on the same morning. Coincidence? Impossible. The prophecy's "city will cease to be a city" wasn't about some spiritual collapse. It was literal. Winter City would fall, attacked from outside while sabotaged from within. A messenger pounded on my door, drenched in sweat. The princess ordered me to the Emergency Military Council immediately. I grabbed my black robe and moved fast. My brain was already running at maximum speed. When would the internal cult strike? How? Burn the granaries, assassinate officials, incite riots. And the Empire's army, which route would they take? The Bitter Valley? Straight over the Dragon Mountains? Internal and external threats, perfectly synchronized. Someone was orchestrating this.